study session of the City Council. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at www.broomfield.org. The public may listen to this evening's study session at broomfield.org/city council or through your local television channel 8. Our agenda this evening includes 3 study session items. Council will receive updates from staff on the semi-annual performance and internal audit, as well as regional transportation. Additionally, council will discuss the proposed retail marijuana regulations. So let's start out with the first study session, which is an item, an update on the semi-annual performance and internal audit. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I will ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Bernie Block, the Director of Performance and Internal Audits, will walk us through this item. Bernie?
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. It's been a while since we've last met, back in January of this year. A lot has happened since then, as I'm sure we can all relate, and it's required many of us to pivot and reprioritize our efforts throughout the year. At the beginning of the year, we started off with the 2020 annual project plan, which is attachment number 1 in your packet. We were able to issue the cash receipts internal controls procedures audit, and we started working on the body worn cameras audit as well, but that was deferred due to COVID-19. We also changed the nature of the Comprehensive Emergency Management Program from an audit to a business process improvement project. We've been working with a consultant these past few months to do a mid-action review of our response to our recovery and response efforts related to COVID-19. It's involved soliciting feedback from a lot of employees, and they've created kind of an improvement plan, if you will, that we've already started taking action on and working towards implementation on some of that. The consultant has one final deliverable related to a work plan for the overall documentation of the Comprehensive Emergency Management Program. And that report will likely be issued sometime in January. Now, the remaining projects on the project plan, some of these may roll over into 2021. Before finalizing the next year's plan, I'll be reaching out to the department heads to make sure I have an understanding of any changes in their environment, any immediate needs, and then I'll sit down with the city and county manager's office and we'll finalize the 2021 project plan. Also included in your packet is the performance and internal audit status updates listing. That's attachment number 2. This shows the status of all audit recommendations that have had since we last met. It's a fairly lengthy document, so I won't go through it in detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have related to this document. So with that, maybe I'll just pause for a second and see if there are any questions.
So we'll go to questions from council. Are there any questions from council?
Okay. You know, as I mentioned before, we've all had to kind of change our priorities, and that's been the case for, you know, a lot of people throughout the organization. We have had some movement on getting the recommendations implemented, but it's been a little slower this year, admittingly, and understandably so. As far as the majority of the activities that I've been working on, it's mostly been in the response and recovery efforts. I've been assisting finance with the grant administration efforts, and then also been working with emergency management, as I mentioned, and not only on the business process improvement side, but assisting in their efforts to support public health in their efforts as well. So that kind of sums up what I've been doing this past year, and I'm happy to go into any additional detail if you would like more information.
So council, if you have any comments or questions, Councilmember Tessier.
Thanks. I just wanted to thank you, Bernie, for your methodical and detailed approach with all the CARES Act funding. I think there was so much to it, and the way that the team approached it was phenomenal, and we see the benefits. It was a long time coming, and there were so many unknowns, but the way you all did it, I can see the benefits because other communities haven't done it that way, and they're struggling to spend their money and they have to get rid of it. And the way it's phenomenal. So thank you for really thinking that through and making sure that we were set up to really help. The city was set up to help so many of the partners in the community for nonprofit and whatnot. So I really appreciate that and wanted to say that. So thank you.
Thank you. It was definitely a group effort. It's amazing how everyone from different parts of the organization has come together to get it done.
Any other questions or comments for Bernie? Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, no questions. It was all pretty self-explanatory in the guideline why things were taking longer, and it's totally understandable. A lot has been implemented and there's a lot in progress. So we just continue to forge ahead. And I want to echo Councilmember Tessier's comments because so many of our regional partners are scrambling and trying to get extensions. And when I checked with City Manager Hoffman, she's like, nope, it's all been allocated. So great job to everyone.
Yeah, our projections are that we will be able to utilize our full coronavirus relief fund allocation based on the eligible expenses we've identified. So,
Thank you, Bernie. Councilmember Lim.
Mr. Black, would you go into the status of the body-worn camera audit? You said you had put it on hold. So it was my understanding, just in case anybody is listening, that Broomfield was kind of ahead of the curve on the whole implementation of the body-worn cameras. So how do you see the current status where you left off with that audit?
I would agree that Broomfield is an earlier adopter of the body-worn cameras. They implemented the program a couple years ago, and it was Chief Krieger's request that we come in now that it's been in place for a couple years and to take a look at it, a fresh set of eyes, just to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, that our policies and procedures and operating practices are in place and functioning properly. We got to the point of where we were soliciting feedback through surveys and doing interviews and starting to look at some of that documentation, and then it just became increasingly difficult to, other priorities were pulling people in other directions. So we decided to put it on hold. Didn't realize it would be this long. So, and before we start that up again, we'll make sure that we'll revisit our scope and objectives and see if anything's changed, and then we'll try to pick up where we left off there.
Okay, Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you, Bernie, for Mr. Block for the report. Given COVID, it seems like there's been a number of delays on the audit. During this time, we've also had some major transitions as well with staff. Can you give council a glimpse of on the roadmap ahead with the audit into 2021 and how those staffing changes will affect that previous work?
Sure. As I mentioned, a few of the audits that were on the 2020 project plan, I'll be recommending that we do move forward on those in 2021. HHS fiscal operations, they've had some turnover in that function. I think this is a good time to revisit their activities. IT security, cybersecurity is very important these days. We are heavily dependent on it. And we made it a goal organizationally to try to take a look at that every year. 2020, unfortunately, just the timing wasn't right. So we're gonna, that'll be another recommendation moving into 2021. The cash receipts for the courts and PD, they've implemented a new system over there. They're just kind of getting their new operating practices in place. So we wanted to take a look at that as well. As far as the other projects, we do have a listing of other potential projects that we'll revisit. And again, I want to make sure I understand that if there are any changes in the organization that have had a major impact on operations, as you mentioned, you know, turnover in any function. But again, it would have to, we just want to make sure that the scope and objectives of the audit are well thought out. So I can't fully answer that question now until I've had more time to dig in and look at the details. But I expect to bring forward a proposed plan to the CMO in early January. Did that answer all your questions, Councilmember Shaw?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I guess I'll look, you know, toward the proposed plan in January for kind of further follow-up on this. Thanks.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions or comments, Mr. Block. So thank you so much for coming on this evening. You, like I said, your reports are thorough. I look forward to seeing what, you know, your work for next year. So, and once again, on behalf of, as already mentioned, thank you so much for your work on the CARES Act. It was a big deal. And if I recall, the number was like 6.2 million. Was that the number?
It was roughly 6,045,000,
Okay.
but we have received through other allocations through the state and other grants that have been applied for throughout the organization, about 7.3 million in total.
Oh, wow.
Thank
you.
Funding has been what we've been trying to administer over these past few months. So it's moving quick.
Thank you, Bernie. So thank you very much and look forward to your next presentation.
And thank you for everything that you're doing as well.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Yeah. So let's move on to the regional transportation update. I think I noticed that Sarah has 50 slides and it deserves 50 slides. It's a big subject. I wanted to first, and it was Councilmember Schaaf that made me think of this, that this was an unusual year for RTD. I don't remember this happening before. I think we're in Region I, Division I. Eric can, you know, Mr. Davis can tell us that. And we had one person that tried to run for office and they didn't get enough petitions in. And we all found out that what happens is that the county that has the largest population in that division, or whatever you call it, district, I guess, gets to select it. And it turned out it was the Boulder County Commission selected, you know, our RTD representative. And I want to say on this, I want to give real credit to the Boulder County Commissioners because they did a really good job. They went out of their way to make us feel, at least I presume you saw all the emails, to make us feel included. And they came up with what I consider to be, you know, the absolute best candidate. You know, Eric and I had talked early on in the season. I encouraged him to put his name in, and he jumped in. He's got you know, he can give a little bit of his background for those. A lot of you know him because he was involved in oil and gas a year ago or a year and a half ago, and that's when I met him and was extremely impressed by him. So I wanted to introduce Eric Davidson, who is our new. You have not been sworn in yet, though, have you, Eric? So you're
correct.
I don't know what you call it. I guess you're the board elect or board, whatever the phrase is. But Eric, you want to say a few words to City Council?
Sure. Yeah. Good to see you all. I know many of you, not all of you, but it's certainly great to be here. I will be the director for District I, and I thank you to all of you who have been supportive in that, and certainly to all of you who have helped get me up to speed. I'm very humbled by the appointment. I think given that I was appointed and not elected, it's doubly important for me to communicate with everybody throughout the district. So first and foremost, please know that I'm here. I'm very interested to collaborate with all of you, to hear all of your ideas, your thoughts, your concerns. And also, I'd just like to say I am a Broomfield resident, so it's exciting to be here and working with you all. And thank you for everything you do to make this a great city to live in. Just a little bit about myself. For those of you that don't know me, my background is largely in the private sector. I've worked as an engineer. I've worked as a product management leader in tech. I've worked as a business owner and a business leader on the financial side of things and on the technology side of things. And I'm someone who believes very strongly in sustainable, strong cities and towns. I believe in healthy transit systems. It's sort of at the heart and soul of a stronger city. I think the United States is at its best when we move everybody throughout our spaces and involve everybody in our economy and our society. RTD is facing a lot of challenges. For District I, we face multiple unfinished corridors. RTD at large has financial problems that started before the pandemic that have gotten worse from the pandemic, not the least of which is our ballooning debt service. We're facing ridership problems that also started pre-pandemic. So I know this is going to be a big challenge, but as this region continues to grow, I'm really excited about what's possible, particularly if RTD does the best job it can at partnering with all of our communities and really involving everybody here. So it's great to be here. I want to be a collaborator. I want to be a good partner. I want to see RTD have a culture of partnership. So please hold me accountable to that and reach out to me anytime. It's great to be here.
I wanted to allow a couple of minutes, understand that Eric has not been sworn in yet. So you can, I guess, give us any questions or comments for Eric. I wanted to allow a few minutes for that, and then we'll go right into Sarah's presentation. So I'm not. Oh, Councilmember Schaaf.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo. I didn't want to Mr. Davidson to leave our meeting without being commented from council, but I just wanted to echo the mayor's comments. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, for stepping up and volunteering for this important role. Thank you to the Boulder County Commissioners for your process. I thought it was very transparent. It was very inclusive. They decided to interview every candidate that had applied, and I thought that was a good move on their part. And I feel that they got the best candidate. So I look forward to further conversations with you, Mr. Davidson, after you are sworn in, and look forward to your great work on this board. Thank you.
Councilor Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, Mr. Davidson. I just wanted to chime in and say, well, first of all, thank you for stepping up in public service, especially at this time. You've got some really tough decisions ahead of you in a really tough year. And I just wanted to say how happy I am that Broomfield will have a strong voice on the RTD board. It's been some time since we've been, represented from one of our own residents. So I'm thrilled with your appointment, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks. Likewise.
Okay, so we'll move into to the study session and to Sarah's presentation. I guess I'll just start at the very beginning. That I think the one thing you realize that, particularly when you're a mayor and a lot of regional stuff, and I want to thank Councilmember Schaaf for helping take us on that load, and Councilmember Law Evans, that transportation is one of the biggest issues you work on, and it's one of the, we just don't have the funding to do it. And so I'm really looking forward to the presentation and council's comments, because there's just a lot going on in the transportation world. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's have our presentation. Do you want to lead off first, Jennifer, or just jump into Sarah?
Sarah is ready with her 50 slides, and can't wait for her to maneuver through, because afterwards we're all going to say, was that really 50 slides? So Sarah gets the best presenter of the annual CCOB award. So without further ado, Sarah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I will do my best to move through these slides fairly quickly. I do understand there's a lot of content here, but I did want to be sure I provided this information for you to review ahead of time, as well as to review later on. And if you have any questions in the future, always feel free to reach out for any clarifications. Good evening. Again, I'm Sarah Grant, Transportation Manager, and I plan to provide a brief overview of regional transportation. I would like to note that in my presentation tonight, I won't be covering all of the corridors I have listed in the memo, but I wanted to focus on some key topic areas that are of immediate and relevant interest, including US 36, Northwest Rail, Colorado 7, and also funding and regional planning. There are extensive hyperlinks in the relevant documents and websites for you to review in your memo to peruse as you need to. I welcome comments or discussions on this topic, including the memo and presentation tonight. First slide, please. First, I wanted to provide a brief context of transportation costs, trends, and funding, and I'll go into some details about regional transportation projects. This data was collected for our 2016 transportation plan, and your slide notes the most recent data of changes in trends. There are on average about 1.8 cars per Broomfield household that drives 22,000 miles per year with an average commute of 27 minutes. We are generally seeing a slight increasing trend in all these areas since 2016, with the exception of a small downward trend in vehicle miles traveled. Annually, on average, Broomfield households spend about $13,000 a year on transportation costs, and we're seeing this trending to almost $14,000 a year. Combining that with housing costs, the average household spends about 54% of their income on basic housing and transportation costs, according to the Center of Neighborhood Technology. That should be under 45% to remain affordable. The percentage split has been relatively stable over the last 4 years since we adopted the 2016 Comprehensive Plan and Transportation Plan. Access to affordable transportation options is a key factor to the attainment of affordable living in Broomfield. Next slide, please. This is 2019 data from the DRCOG regarding vehicle miles traveled. The blue line is overall VMT, vehicle miles traveled for our region. The orange line is VMT per capita. In 2019, over 84 million miles were driven on Denver region's roads and highways. That's an average of about 25 miles per day per person. Regional estimates of vehicle miles traveled in 2019 showed no change from 2018 to 2019, even though the region's population increased by 1.4%. This is the first time since 2011 there was not an annual increase in VMT in the Denver region. Now, this is just 2019 data and does not yet account for the 2020 data yet. The weekday VMT per capita decreased slightly for the second straight year. 3 historic periods are shown here of change. A 4th period is likely beginning now, and though its characteristics are not yet known. So the first period you see there, lasting for more than 100 years from the invention of the automobiles, vehicle miles traveled grew pretty consistently, with some exceptions of downward turns in the early 1940s during World War II and the 1970s during the embargo on imported oil. The second period during the Great Recession, there was no growth in annual VMT, accompanied by significant declines in VMT per capita in the Denver metro region. The third period, economic recovery in 2012, there was a rebound in growth that had started with a consistent annual VMT through 2017. And as mentioned previously, we're entering into a 4th period, and we really don't know what may be coming in the future. What will be the aftermath of COVID-19 and its effects on travel? Will people continue teleworking? Will fuel costs remain relatively low? How will trips be distributed among the various modes of travel? And how will the dynamic relationship of housing choice, supply, and demand affect where people choose to live or are economically steered to live? Next slide, please. We've also seen in our region a shift in mobility preferences and shifts in land use. We're seeing more mobility hubs and transit-oriented developed, and a shift in preference for options for more walkable and bikeable neighborhoods. We are seeing that now new technologies are emerging, like shared micromobility, such as bikes and scooters, and transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft providing options for first and last mile connections. Next slide, please. I also wanted to touch briefly on how transportation is funded here. State and federal fuel taxes are collected, but those have not been raised in over 27 years. The federal fuel tax was last raised in 1993 and in Colorado not since 1991. Our purchasing power is less than a third than it was in the early 1990s due to inflation. We have more demand and strain on our infrastructure, but less funds to build them with. Through 2009, the Colorado Faster Act, we collect additional fees and fines that help support our system. There's still significant gaps in funding. RTD, as we all well know, are funded with support of 1% sales tax with the base system of 0.6% and 0.4% for the voter-approved fast tracks projects in 2004. Locally, Broomfield funds our projects through sales tax, property tax collections, impact fees, and developer contributions. We'll anticipate that there will be discussions at the state level on how to increase revenue streams to support our transportation system in 2021 legislative session. We're also monitoring potential opportunities with the new federal administration. Next slide, please. These next two slides show commuting trends. Broomfield is a commuter community. Pre-COVID, approximately 80% of our employed residents left Broomfield each day to work in other communities, primarily in Denver and Boulder. Only about 14% of our employed residents also work here. Next slide, please. Of the employees that work here in Broomfield, 88% of them commute into Broomfield each day. Only about 12% of our employment is a Broomfield resident. These origins are a bit more scattered, about 10% coming from Westminster, 10% from Denver, 8% from Thornton, 5% from Arvada, and so on down the list. Next slide, please. In 2016, Council adopted a multimodal transportation vision, taking into account these trends that we're seeing in our region and locally. We seek to support all modes, people of all ages and abilities, using the transportation system to reduce our dependence on single occupant vehicles and reducing our environmental impact while supporting economic development. Next slide, please. Our goals include optimizing our multimodal transportation network to move people and goods now and into the future. We support travel choices and providing mobility for people of all ages. We also support a connected transportation system for all modes and connecting within and to our neighboring communities. Next slide, please. We also support safe and livable streets, accessible to all. We participate and influence in regional transportation planning to increase our access to the multimodal network, and we integrate into the multimodal network and land use to support our economic plans and policies. I've included a summary of these plans and policies in your memo, as well as a link to a document that shows some key actions that we've accomplished since 2016, since we adopted the transportation plan. Next slide, please. We have been working on a multimodal vision for quite some time. We began our journey over 20 years ago. We began working with our neighbors along US 36 to achieve this vision and created the US 36 Mayors and Commissioners, now known as the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners. They have been meeting monthly and going to Washington, DC to lobby for funds every year for the last 20 years. The outcome of the US 36 studies support managed lanes, bus rapid transit, a regional bikeway, and transportation demand management. The infrastructure was largely completed in 2016. Next slide, please. While we were studying the US 36 corridor, voters approved fast tracks in 2004, which included US 36 BRT and Northwest Rail. The BRT launched in 2016, and last year's service carried over 3.3 million passengers. Bike to Work Day, we saw over 1,200 cyclists along the bikeway in Broomfield. Currently, service has been reduced due to a dramatic decline in ridership due to COVID. Pre-COVID, we saw about 12 to 13,000 commuters every weekday on the Flatiron Flyer on US 36. That has dropped to about 10% of its level pre-COVID. Next slide. To make supportive multimodal infrastructure, we studied and are continuing to implement elements of the first and final mile US 36 first and final mile study to support access, including wayfinding signage along the bikeway, bike and ride shelters for secure long-term parking, and infrastructure, including overpasses and underpasses to remove barriers to the BNS Railway and the highway itself. We continue to explore business partnerships and opportunities for transportation demand management. Upcoming initiatives that align with the first and final mile plan and study and transportation goals may be to assess Council's interest in pursuing shared micromobility, such as bike share and transportation demand management programmatic initiatives. Next slide, please. I would also like to bring to Council's attention, as a part of the US 36 environmental impact study completed in 2009, the preferred alternative alignment for the US 36 Wadsworth Interchange is proposed and shown here. Several components of the circulation have been complete, such as the most notable one, the 120th Avenue connection, and some of the circulation and access, and also the realignment of 112th Avenue. There are a few components that still remain that we continue to advocate for funding to complete improvements, including reconfiguration of the eastbound on and off ramps that do have an impact on adjacent parcels shown in red. CDOT at this time does not have any plans to make these improvements in the near future, as there's currently no identified funding to complete these interchange components, and it's not their practice to purchase property without having a project programmed. Next slide, please. The other component of fast tracks included Northwest Commuter Rail. The corridor was originally envisioned as a 41-mile corridor with 6 stations. One station identified in Broomfield was Flatiron Station. The corridor is planned for diesel unit trains and require double tracking and sharing with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe operations at 55 trains per day. Next slide, please. The first segment to Westminster Station opened in 2016 and carried close to 500,000 riders in 2019. Next slide, please. Northwest mayors and commissioners continue to work on strategies to phase implementation of rail, including a lower cost peak rail service plan as identified in the RTD Northwest Area Mobility Study that was completed in 2014. The intent is to provide a startup service with minimal infrastructure to keep capital costs low. The proposed operations is 3 trains in the morning and 3 trains in the afternoon from Longmont to Denver. The service would be shared with freight service and would require a new maintenance facility for Longmont. Next slide, please. Assumptions for this service include a set of stations that slightly vary from fast tracks, including adding a station at 116th Avenue in Broomfield near the US 36 and Broomfield station. RTD estimates $184 million in costs plus $14 million in annual operations. But at this time, there are still unknown costs, including the fees to operate on BNSF right-of-way, as well as costs associated with the sidings to allow these trains to pass safely and share the line with the freight. Next slide, please. Since this initial estimation of peak rail service, there are a few key milestones I'd like to highlight. In 2018 and 2019, the US 36 mayors and commissioners worked on a policy document as a commitment to Northwest Rail in honor of the 2004 vote. In 2019, RTD adopted a resolution to commit to completion of fast tracks and support peak rail service. Subsequent to this adoption, gave immediate direction to staff to develop the RTD staff, the initial unfinished fast tracks corridors report shown here, which outlines in detail the status of the corridors, estimated costs, financial opportunities, and related timelines to implement. In 2019 and 2020, RTD succeeded in a response from BNSF, and RTD and the Northwest mayors and commissioners continue conversations, which I'll talk more about in a moment. In mid-2020, RTD began to grapple with the financial impact of COVID, and the Northwest mayors and commissioners advocated to the RTD board to preserve FISA, which is the Fast Tracks Internal Savings Account, developed in 2012, to ensure that there were seed funds available to support the completion of fast tracks in the future. Currently, in the FISA account, there's an estimated balance of about $100 million. Next slide. In February 2020, just before COVID, a small delegation of RTD and Northwest mayors and commissioners representatives head to Fort Worth, Texas to meet with BNSF to discuss peak service rail. BNSF provided the results of their modeling capital improvements that would be required, signal control upgrades, and what would be needed for sidings. Still at this time, we don't have a cost for these operations, but BNSF would require RTD to design these improvements. Next slide. In addition, we are engaged with monitoring Front Range passenger rail planning effort since fall 2019 and how that may support future commuter rail service in Broomfield. The Front Range Passenger Rail Commission was set up by Senate Bill 17-153 and was charged with working to preserve the Southwest Chief service in Colorado and facilitate the development of Front Range passenger rail. Next slide. This slide shows the composition of Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. Representatives include members from DRCOG, RTD, they are voting members, as well as representatives from Amtrak and CDOT that are at the table as non-voting members. Of interest, freight operators are also here at the table, including Union Pacific and BNSF's DJ Mitchell, who is the Assistant VP of Passenger Operations. Next slide, please. The Front Range Passenger Rail Study is a blended team comprised of the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission, CDOT staff, and consultants. Project elements include service development plan options, pre-NEPA activities, policy and governing structure, and public engagement. This process kicked off in fall of 2019. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes some of the key outcomes from a month-long engagement in July 2020, with over 8,000 unique users interacting with the online tool. Notably, most wanted rail to serve Denver Union Station rather than destinations such as the airport. Primary theme of support was over in 500 open-ended comments was overwhelmingly positive. 70% of the open-ended comments indicated a positive response for Front Range Passenger Rail. Input on priorities included access to stations, interconnecting with other modes, existing and planned, reasonable travel times, and affordability of the service. Next slide, please. The modeling results. So I'll briefly cover some of the initial modeling results. So shown here that there would be notable demand for rail for Front Range, with a high demand for regular commuters as well as special events. Ridership projections fare well against other intercity corridors in the country, and there would be real reductions in emissions and vehicle miles traveled in the Front Range. Next slide, please. These following slides are directly from a presentation from Front Range Passenger Rail staff. I'll try to go over these quickly, but these are available for you to review at any time. This slide shows where we are in the study, and which is an alternative analysis that previously eliminated some other segments based on some preliminary analysis of the other corridors that were not viable. Next slide, please. So the first step in this process for the study, they developed potential alignments, and alignments were evaluated and some were eliminated. There are 3 core routes left shown here that extend through the various segments, and for some of these can be mixed and matched, but generally there are 3 main alignments. In pink is the I-25 E470 alignment to Denver Airport, shown in pink. In yellow, the central alignment is the BNSF alignment in the south, and at Denver Union Station follows the I-25 commuter rail alignment north. And finally, in blue is the BNSF freight rail alignment that also is in alignment with the future Northwest Rail north of Union Station. Next slide, please. Step 2 was to develop performance and operating assumptions, 24 trains a day, 1 hour headways, 30 minutes in the peak, and there were 9 primary stations that were assessed. Next slide, please. The next step, they did some ridership projections and used advanced state-of-the-art model adapted from DRCOG and used data inputs from 2050. They used the most up-to-date information as far as land use projections and found a strong demand for Denver Union Station as a hub. Next slide, please. This slide shows the BNSF alignment, which was the strongest for ridership and where it falls against other intercity services. It is estimated in 2040 that there would be 9,400 weekday riders. And again, against all the other alignments, the BNSF alignment did show the strongest potential for ridership. Next slide, please. They are also redoing the model because in some of their initial assumptions, they actually had assumed a much higher fare rate than some of the other intercity rail services in the country. So they did a remodeling and actually found a 50% increase in those initial projections. Next slide, please. So step 4. In the study, they're currently estimating the costs right now. So they will be looking at capital and operations as well as maintenance. We hope to have some of these initial cost estimates early next year. Next slide, please. Step 5. The study largely completed high-level review of environmental and community impacts listed here in this slide. Next slide, please. And in step 6, which currently is in progress, they are completing a comparative analysis of all the alignments that were viable, including operational considerations, environmental and community impacts, economic considerations, and feasibility and implementation. Next slide, please. And last but not least, I wanted to bring to your attention that Amtrak recently has proposed a new program to support the rail network evolution and expansion of intercity rail along corridors such as the Front Range Passenger Rail. As proposed, the program would fund 100% capital cost and initial years of operations over a 5-year period, gradually reducing in subsidy. This is something that we'll be watching closely with the new Congress and the administration under Amtrak Joe. Next slide. Shifting gears back to our urban arterial network. When RTD understood that Northwest Rail would no longer be financially viable in the near term, RTD worked with the Northwest communities on the Northwest Area Mobility Study, also known as NAMS. The purpose of NAMS was to develop consensus among RTD, CDOT, and corridor stakeholders, including local jurisdictions, on the cost-effective mobility improvements to serve the Northwest area. Here's a map that shows that overall network in the Northwest. Recommended for bus rapid transit include State Highway 119, State Highway 7, US 287, West 120th Avenue, State Highway 42, and South Boulder Road. State Highway 119 was the highest priority amongst the stakeholders in the US 36 mayors and commissioners, with Colorado 7 next. And these two are in various phases of design, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. The study also included a recommendation for phased Northwest Rail starter service, as previously discussed, North I-25 managed lanes, and remaining US 36 commitments. Of note for Broomfield, one of these commitments is a second station at Broomfield Station and having a second parking structure. Next slide, please. State Highway 7, now known as Colorado 7, CDOT has been doing a rebranding of these highways. I even catch it myself sometimes, still calling it State Highway 7. We got to work right away in after the NAM studies, gathering stakeholders to study the highway, and Broomfield helped build a coalition of partners along the 25-30-mile corridor between Brighton and Boulder, crossing 3 counties. And this coalition also now includes stakeholders such as the Northwest Chambers Alliance and now the Adams County Regional Economic Partnership, our transportation demand management organizations, Commuting Solutions, and Smart Commute Metro North, and we regularly engage with CDOT, RTD, and Dr. Cog on our efforts. Next slide, please. We'll be seeing quite a bit of growth along the corridor over the next 20 years, as we know in Broomfield, but along the corridor, we analyzed that by 2040, along Colorado 7 between Brighton and Boulder, there will be 56,000 new residents, 38,000 new jobs, average increase of 37% in traffic, with most of that traffic increasing the highest on the eastern end, of course, with up to 50 to 60% increase over current day traffic patterns. Our projections for high quality transit service could bring us between 8,000 to 10,000 boardings every day. Next slide, please. Additionally, Broomfield and CDOT will be working to expand capacity between Huron and I-25, 2 through lanes in each direction, and this was mentioned in our July study session in transportation in North Broomfield. We anticipate bringing an IGA to council in early 2021 for this partnership effort between CDOT and Broomfield. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the various studies and plans conducted along the corridor over the last 5 years, and now we're headed into a multi-year preliminary engineering phase with CDOT, thanks to a regional grant of $10 million with the support of CDOT, local agencies contributing to this project as approved by council earlier this year. Next slide, please. The first phase of this $10 million project is to develop a corridor development plan. We've been working over the last several months developing goals, identifying change conditions, defining environmental approach, and identifying technical methodologies of how we would prioritize projects along these corridors. The corridor development plan will lay out specific projects and implementation plan for multimodal deployment and a communications plan, as well as outline the funding opportunities. Next slide, please. Early on, CDOT technical staff, including RTD and the consultant team, identified our goals, which include advancing multimodal improvements, addressing our current needs, preparing for the future, and complementing existing and planned infrastructure, leveraging our joint opportunities, as well as finally ensuring equity across the corridor with all the funding partners that contributed to this project. Next slide, please. We then identified our technical methods, including corridor-wide activities. So some of the funding will not only just go to individual projects, but items that will benefit the entire corridor, such as LiDAR mapping, a corridor systems planning and traffic forecasting, environmental analysis, a technology deployment plan, a corridor bicycle treatment plan, and corridor communication plan. We then look to individual proposed actions or sections of independent utility, such as sections, major segments of highway, intersections, and major bridges, and define the level of design and assumed cost. Next slide, please. I'd like to note that the project does not include initiation of NEPA, but will provide a recommended environmental approach to provide the necessary and supporting environmental analysis for the preliminary engineering and design in compliance with NEPA processes to streamline subsequent environmental documentation that will be conducted later on for final design and construction. Next slide, please. We then categorized all of the proposed actions, which we looked through all of the plans and studies and looked at these various segments and major projects that need to be completed on the corridor. And we put them into various categories, including unresolved planning issues, which include for Broomfield defining the location for Broomfield Station along baseline. CDOT will be working with Broomfield and corridor stakeholders to refine the ultimate preferred location. Other project categories include advancing preliminary design for these sections of independent utility that are shown in this graphic. These include intersections, major bridges, and segments. Right-of-way will be to be determined, and as needed, we do not anticipate a significant amount of funding to be used for right-of-way, but we did want to reserve in our grant the opportunity if right-of-way did essentially need to be procured right-of-way, we may have the flexibility to do that. And then there is also planning for a predictable future, and Erie will be conducting a concept plan for the Erie Airport Road entrance. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates individual proposed actions and our evaluation methods to prioritize sections of independent utility. These are based on the goals of the project that we outlined earlier, and supporting analysis is conducted to evaluate these goals. Some of these included, as shown here in these graphics in small fashion, but it shows the work that we've done to conduct a basic level analysis to prioritize these projects. At a high level, these include ped bike comfort analysis, peak hour traffic speed analysis, intersection volume to capacity. We also looked at traffic and crashes. We also looked at land use and active development projects along the corridor. Next slide, please. Projects were then comparatively scored high, medium, low, and then ranked into two tiers. Priority 1 being projects constrained by the budget with an equity lens, and priority 2 being remaining projects as funding allows. Next slide, please. This is a map of the proposed priority 1 actions of segments of independent utility that are proposed to begin work with the remaining of the $10 million grant, which will be represented on the next slide in the table. These segments are based on the previous planning studies, including the planning environmental linkage studies that were conducted and BRT studies. Next slide, please. And this is the table of those shown in the map here. For Broomfield, we will be looking at preliminary design of level 1. Most of these planning efforts will be either level 1 or concept studies as needed. We'll be looking at preliminary engineering Sheridan to I-25, as well as the Lowell intersection. And as mentioned previously, a concept plan to help refine the ultimate location for the BRT station along Colorado 7 in Broomfield. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense, this is the project timeline. It will be a 4-year project. We've been working for the last 6 months on the corridor development plan, and we will be presenting the draft corridor development plan in January to the Colorado 7 Coalition. From there, CDOT will begin assigning staff and roles to the various projects and define consultant needs and procure those needed services to get going on those projects. In addition, some of the corridor-wide activities will begin next year, including the LiDAR mapping and corridor tools mentioned previously. Actual design activities are likely to begin in 2022 into 2023. Next slide, please. Related to Colorado 7, we envision the redevelopment of the I-25 Colorado Interchange to be a diverging diamond that supports regional transit on I-25 and Colorado 7, including supporting services to Mustang to Fort Collins, as well as regional services provided by RTD and local services as well. It provides safe bed-bike connections, and the concept design is complete. CDOT is working to complete that concept design and bring it up to a 30% to ready the project for funding. The cost of the I-25 segment from Northwest Parkway to Colorado 7, as well as the interchange, is estimated at $200 million. It's essential that these two are constructed together to reduce any kind of throwaway that may incur by developing these two projects independently. CDOT has now identified I-25 North as a priority and Colorado 7 in their vision plan. And these projects are listed in the DRCOG Regional Transportation Plan, which I'll discuss towards the end of our presentation as far as regional planning and funding. Next slide, please. This is the Mobility Hub visualization. I'm going to skip this for now, but this is available for you to view at your own time. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. Next slide, please. I just want to touch really quickly. Next slide, please. Perfect. I just want to touch on briefly I-25 North. So CDOT and HPTE have funded managed lanes on US 36 to south of Northwest Parkway. Broomfield contributed to this first segment. Other communities adjacent to this segment also contributed. The managed lane is expected to continue north to Fort Collins, and CDOT is working on segments north of Broomfield. There are ongoing discussions with HPTE and CDOT about the use of toll revenues in the corridor from which they're collected to support managed lanes, to support the managed lane segment that's missing here. Next slide, please. And rounding back out to NAMS, I wanted to touch on some of these other corridors. So in addition to Colorado 7, Boulder County is taking the lead on US 287 BRT study that's just getting started. A link to the project website is provided, and there's currently a survey out, and that will be open now through mid-January. Next year, Broomfield will get started with CDOT on the 120th Avenue project as a multimodal study and safety to improve operations on that section of roadway in Broomfield. And before, let's see here, next slide, please. Perfect. Thanks for hanging in there. Just a couple more slides. I just wanted to briefly touch on state and regional planning and funding. In 2019, CDOT conducted a robust statewide planning process to provide input to your transportation plan effort. CDOT visited every county in the state, including Broomfield's Transportation Forum. And here's a summary of projects that are included in their 10-year vision that was adopted by CDOT this summer and that are aligned with Broomfield and our mayors and commissioners' NAMS priorities. It's notable that the 10-year planning horizon will be flexible due to current funding constraints, but CDOT is committed to their vision plan priorities, even if it may take longer than 10 years to complete. The line items that are not specific projects are likely to be programmed by CDOT and/or grant opportunities. Next slide, please. DRCOG is updating their regional transportation plan and projects, and this is a high-level planning document that's required by the federal government that includes approximate funding and staging years for large transportation projects. It is likely the funding and the years will change slightly, but overall the plan represents types of projects we could expect to be reasonably funded over the next 30 years with anticipated funding. The plan includes funding for I-25, the Mobility Hub at Colorado 7, significant funding for the Colorado 7 corridor itself, 120th Avenue, and US 287. Notably, for the first time, Northwest Rail is also acknowledged in this plan. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This concludes my presentation.
Great job, Sarah. You made it through quick. Great job. I just wanted to make one comment. You talked about the costs, having spent a lot of time on this. RTD had an update for us on December 1st, and RTD, and I pulled up the slides while you were doing it. They estimated the cost of of the Northwest Rail as designed for fast tracks at 1.7 billion with 5,400 riders. More significantly, the peak rail, while nobody's added up the numbers, RTD gave us a number of $708.2 million for 1,400 riders a day, which seems good. I just wanted to get those numbers out there because those numbers are huge. And so I just wanted to get those numbers out there. I'll open it up to the questions from council. There was a lot you just gave us there, but I loved it. Councilmember Schaaf.
Sure, I'll go first. So I think that, right now we have a great opportunity with us going into this new legislative session. One of the transportation chair, the transportation chair in the House is our Representative Matt Gray. So we have a great opportunity to, aggressively lobby our efforts for our regional roads, such as Colorado 287, Colorado State Highway, or Colorado 7, as well as the I-25 Highway 7 interchange. So I think that we have a great opportunity right now to kind of continue to push and be aggressive on those regional roads. I do think that locally we must continue to find public and private solutions for transit that really doesn't necessarily rely on RTD. I think that one of those that we had coming out of the TIP process was the pilot and study that would utilize and work with Lyft and Uber. Sarah, can you, Ms. Grant, can you talk about that TIP project and how that study and pilot program would work?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf, for the question. So we do have a transit needs assessment and pilot program to begin next year. We are currently waiting on that IGA from RTD. I have heard that we will be getting that IGA hopefully very soon, so I hope to bring that to council early next year. The intent of that project is for Broomfield to do its own transit planning and assess our own transit needs. And then from that study, target some projects, including pilot programs that could be funded with the federal funds to start up some new programs that either could be in alignment with RTD current programs and services, or they may be other types of services in order to meet our current needs in Broomfield.
Thank you for that. I'm really excited about the possibilities of this, because I do think that while there is some opportunity to work with RTD locally, there is a lot of other options that are there, and to really provide a coordinated network of transportation options that don't rely on single occupant vehicles to basically get people around in Broomfield, as well as get people from their homes to their workforce centers, whether that's in Broomfield or outside of Broomfield. And I think that project really can get us there in a big way. I think that, and I just got an update that Matt Gray is no longer the chair of the Transportation Committee. So that is breaking news for me. Maybe you all knew that and probably were going to correct me later. I think that as we go into this legislative session, there's got to be a modernization of our transportation. Hopefully, that is something that our legislature is really going to take care of this year. I would really like council to work with the transportation chairs to really advance, such options as like the transportation value area capture bill that Broomfield kind of led the way on years ago. And by doing that, we can create regional solutions that are going to enhance the statewide solution that the legislature in the state of Colorado really wants to continue to see. They want to see a statewide solution, but I think that we've got to come up with some regional enhancements. And I do think that transportation value area capture bill could potentially do that. So I don't know if now is a good time to discuss that, or if we can have a conversation on that later on. And I look to staff on whether or not now is an appropriate time or later on.
Jennifer, you want to comment on that, or Ms. Hoffman?
I'll look to Sarah as well. As far as any additional movement with regards to TVAC, Matt had indicated that he would like things to settle, given that Tony is now the chair. So all of the leadership, both in the House and the Senate, have been appointed. I think everyone is coming out of the special session, adjusting and acknowledging their new roles. So there has not been a push to have additional conversation yet. I would think that would change actually the week of the 21st, although it's counterintuitive to think the closer we get to Christmas, they wouldn't be having conversations that week. But I'm hearing that they are in fact having conversations the week of the 21st.
Great. Well, I look forward to having that conversation more with the legislature and seeing if that's a viable option for somebody to carry forward. You know, I think that one of the things that within this local transportation idea is that there's been a movement for 20 is enough, or 20 is plenty. I can't remember exactly the exact phrase, but the idea of lowering the speed limit on especially neighborhood residential streets. And this is something that I hear a lot about, especially out of the second filing, a lot of those east-west streets, that there is constant speeding up and down those streets. And I think that, you know, looking at a possible, you know, lowering the speed limit on those local streets is something I would like council to consider moving forward with. You know, we do have these residential streets that tend to have high-speed traffic, kind of subverting more of our regional areas, whether that's kind of going around the construction that's occurring on 144th, whether that's trying to avoid 120th and going down Midway. And a lot of those streets end up in residential neighborhoods. And so, you know, that would be something that I would like council to consider. And then the last thing I would say is that we've talked over the last year about traffic mitigation actions, and some of these traffic mitigation actions have taken place, such as the and I forget the exact terminology, but they're the bumps that were done near the church there in Eagle Trace, as well. And there were some other traffic mitigations. And I just wondered if staff has looked at the metrics for how these mitigations have performed for both motorists, residents, public works, as well as our fire department.
Thank you, Councilmember Shep. Mayor, I'm sorry we don't have our traffic engineer on the line today, as our presentation was focused on regional transportation, but we'd be happy to follow up on your specific questions in regards to the effectiveness of the traffic calming and mitigation measures that we put in place in our neighborhoods.
Perfect. Look forward to hearing that conversation. Thank you. That's all I have for now, Mayor.
Councilmember Groom.
All right. Ms. Grant, thank you. It's always a pleasure hearing from you. You've got the in-depth knowledge of transportation, not only in Broomfield, but you're the go-to for the state of Colorado, I think, too. My question is a little bit more insight on funding issues. So kind of reading through the Colorado and especially the North area transportation, it's page after page that's worth millions, billions of dollars. Do they have a strategy? I know they could put something together in the future, but it's got to be kind of a multi thing. Like you would think increase taxation of electronic cars, you know, miles on electronic cars. You know, what are they thinking about? Not just a tax or a project. Most of them get turned down, and it's getting kind of frustrating that one of the major citizen comments I have, besides oil and gas in Broomfield, is the transportation. But yeah, our voters consistently turn these initiatives down. Have they talked about that? How are they gonna get around that? I know that was a multiple phase question.
Thank you, Councilmember Groom. Mayor, if I can try to answer your question. We are looking in the 2021 session, as I mentioned previously, at tackling funding revenues. And part of that initial conversation, I have heard that they would like to look at new ways in which the transportation system is being used, whether it be transportation network companies, the first and final mile delivery services, that are significantly impacting our transportation system. And I have heard that with their initial conversations that these companies, these commercial entities are very interested in participating in that type of conversation. So I'm hopeful that those will be fruitful over the next legislative session.
Sure. One of the things that I've talked to Dr. Cogs about, and it's kind of been vocal on the regional level, is talking to major corporations that, let's say, employ more than 1,000, I don't know, whatever that number might be, 5,000. And instead of having one large campus, like a certain one that does way down south, and 5,000 employees drive down there daily to the tune of maybe an hour to 2 hours on the road, have we looked at having major corporations have more than one campus, like a north and south campus, or even a northeast, west, south campus, that the employees actually drive to their local campus and not to a major complex? How are we looking at those types of things for the future?
Thank you, Councilmember Groom, Mayor. Those decisions seem to be made at the individual level with the companies and how they support their employees, whether it be, a lifestyle or commuting. We have had conversations with some employers that have actually moved to Broomfield, relocating their offices because of the more attractive multimodal access that is available here in Broomfield compared to where their offices were before. So I think offering, these transportation options and supporting land uses around these transit stations really help employers and businesses to make different decisions about how they might locate their business.
Yeah, and I think even looking at incentives for them, I know a lot of them are very interested, but what is it for the businesses? Because the city and the employees get so much out of it. How can the businesses benefit? So I would love to see us start to talk at a regional level and even a state level about something like that, because I'm really worried that we keep banging our heads trying to get the voters to give us money for these multi-million, billion-dollar type programs, and I don't think they'll keep up with what we need to do for our spending. So how do we get people off the road, I think is another key thing to look at in transportation. But thank you for the update. Very detailed and very informative, even though you went through it briefly. Thank you.
Councilmember Lim.
As Councilmember Groom was referring to the transportation issue as on residents' mind because of gridlock, there is also the perspective of the transportation impact with climate change. So from the perspective of being representative to the ACES committee, I just wanted to put this in the context of the fact that we just adopted greenhouse gas goals, and in that greenhouse gas inventory that we did as the basis of those goals, 42% of our greenhouse gases in Broomfield were generated because of transportation. So this issue is very important to our environment also. And I was particularly encouraged recently, I was on a CCAT call with Senator Winter and Representative Gray. And Senator Winter in particular is taking the perspective of the climate lens in looking at these transportation issues, which she's very involved in. And I know I wanted to acknowledge Ms. Grant too, because she has been very generous with her time in attending the ACES Transportation Subcommittee meetings and offering her expertise to ACES and that subcommittee in particular. I had a question about the transit stop on Colorado 7. So you, Ms. Grant, you said that we would be engaging in a study to see where that would best be situated. And in different pieces, I've heard, when we've had developments come before us on Highway 7, there's different allusions to, well, we don't know quite where that's going. And so what's involved in that decision?
Thank you, Councilmember Lim, Mayor. So the study will help address the final location of the ultimate location for that bus rapid transit. We did a bus rapid transit station area analysis and design, which offered some different types of designs that we could use on the corridor, but still left some unresolved planning issues on the exact location. So we plan to continue those conversations with the stakeholders along the corridor in partnership with CDOT to actually define where that station will be, so we can make some solid plans as far as development and station area infrastructure. And oh, sorry, and I would just add that this is a concept study, which then we can further refine and leverage joint development opportunities to help us build out the appropriate station, and the developments can make land use decisions that hopefully support the station as well.
And does that solely depend on the concentration of the residents nearest, in that will determine the siting, or will it depend on acquisition of land, or all of that above?
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. I think it'll be a combination of things between what the development community is planning. Another key part of the station location is the grade crossing. So whether it be at an intersection at grade, or ideally a grade separation. And that's why we also need CDOT at the table to really help us understand what would be potentially feasible as a grade separation would be the most ideal to support a station. So this concept study will help us identify that as well, of what's feasible, as well as look at what the development opportunities are nearby that may support the station.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Ms. Grant, thank you very much for this discussion. It's all very, very interesting. And I have to keep my hands busy while I listen. So pardon me if I look like I'm wrapping Christmas presents, because that's exactly what I'm doing. So at any rate, I've been following Broomfield's transportation discussion since about 2009, when I believe, Mr. Mayor, you had just been elected for the first time, and you and I served on the Sustainability Committee, the Transportation Subcommittee together. And that was a long time ago, but that's when we, as I recall, that's when we first started talking as a community about multimodal transportation, or modal rich, or whatever the terminology is these days. And that's where certainly we began to talk about transportation networks that are bicycle and pedestrian oriented rather than just vehicular oriented. So it's in one sense, I'm thrilled to hear all of this, because it's it's watching, for me, at least 11 years of discussions come to, well, not exactly fruition, but make it to the next stage where there's potentially these sorts of things going to happen. There's potentially funding available, and other entities are involved, regional cooperation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very exciting on one hand, but my excitement as I listen to your presentation is always tempered by the discussion about fast tracks. And I have to say that in my 7 years on council, the words used to talk about potential solutions for fast tracks and whatnot have not changed particularly. There's this new idea of the peak rail, but in the meantime, that's how many years now of Broomfield taxpayers paying for everybody else to ride the rails. And Councilmember Groom mentioned not knowing or wanting to come up with solutions to try to potentially get Broomfield voters and others to pass some of these transportation tax increases. And what I hear in my discussions with people is, well, fast tracks has been such an utter fiasco for Broomfield. Why would we vote for additional taxes at this point? We don't trust the people that we're putting in charge of that. Why would we give them more money and more authority? And I can't disagree with them on that. I think until RTD, and this is perhaps just a thought for our new RTD board member, until RTD begins making every single decision, be it operational or planning or debt restructuring or whatever that would be, RTD needs to make, in my opinion, every single decision with correcting this, righting this wrong done to Broomfield and the entire Northwest area as a very high priority. Because why at some point, why wouldn't we go sue RTD and try and maybe create a different metropolitan transportation district? I'm not suggesting that, but I do think that on a regular basis, the Broomfield City Council should discuss it. And we haven't discussed it in many years, is what I would say. So I think that my enthusiasm over all these transportation discussions is tempered by the hundreds of millions of dollars that Broomfield taxpayers have paid out and are committed to paying out, for which we get to watch everyone else glide on the rails down to Union Station and out to the airport and all sorts of fun places. So that's my my discussion on that. I will say that I do serve on NADA, which is the North Area Transportation Alliance, maybe that's
Yes.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that NADA has a strong voice in discussing these sorts of things, in making sure that any RTD directors that are in attendance at our meetings remember that we've gotten, well, I don't want to use that word, but you know what's happened to Broomfield, where it's not pretty. So NADA's been a very strong voice, and I think we should continue that collaboration, that partnership. The only other comment I would make is that I'm very pleased to hear, I had not known that the TVCC was hopefully moving forward. And honestly, I think we should call that the Charles Ozaki bill, since really it's his brainchild, and
It is.
in some ways that might be the most fitting homage we could pay to him and his very, very insightful and clever strategy that resulted in the TVCC framework. So thank you very much for working on this. It is supremely important, and let's figure out how to get fast tracks done and get Broomfield the rail we were promised. Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. First of all, I just want to thank Sarah for putting together all this incredible slide deck and for the presentation. So everyone knows that Sarah is a wealth of knowledge, and on top of that, she's kind of a gem regionally with other staff and communities. She's really well respected across the metro area. So so thank you, Sarah. I had a couple comments. I want to make sure everybody looks at the CDOT 10-year vision plan and sees all the good things we have upcoming. And in the 2050 Metro Vision Plan, we got almost everything we asked for in our region in that plan, largely thanks to Sarah. So I think, while transportation can be a disappointing topic a lot, there are a lot of good things, that are in the works. With regard to statewide funding, Broomfield voters in the past have approved of solutions, and statewide voters have not. I hope that after this COVID situation, calms down, and maybe not this legislative session, but maybe the next legislative session, we can have the discussion renewed on regional solutions instead of that statewide plan, because that statewide plan has let us down time and time again. And I think there was some really promising ideas that came up with the TMO solution that had come up right before COVID came. So I hope we can renew those conversations, because it might be a solution for us here in the North Metro area, where our voters have tended to support solutions for transportation. So I think we have a lot of things to look forward to and a lot of work to do in transportation here. But I really appreciate the really thorough review of where everything is, and I look forward to seeing what happens at the state level in the next few years, and hopefully at the federal level, where I think there's been some bipartisan support for a large federal infrastructure bill that hopefully will come to fruition. So things aren't all terrible, but we have a lot of work to do. So I appreciate the time, Mayor, and that's all I have.
Yeah, I'll make a couple. Stan, were you going to say anything, or did you have, no? I wanted to make a couple comments. And I'll go back and acknowledging what Councilmember Law Evans talked about. I have, and anybody who knows me, I have concerns about putting 1.7 billion into the Northwest Rail based on the low ridership it's going to have. And I understand that Fast Tracks was a 4/10 tax that was passed specifically for that. But I mean, from Broomfield's point of view, the Highway 7 and that transit corridor, I just love that transit video. If you guys haven't watched it, watch it twice. It's great. I mean, I just think that if there's a way that we can restructure dollars or transit dollars to Highway 7, because I will point out that I was with Will Tour and others worked very hard to get the BRT completed. And the BRT, I think, is the second highest ridership, on the fast track system. I think it had 12,000 riders per day, up until COVID. And I think the A line was better. So I tend to like bus rapid transit. It's not as expensive and it tends to be pretty flexible. And therefore on Highway 7, it's important that the bus rapid transit have a managed lane where you're assured that you can go a certain distance. So I'll just make that comment. I will point out something that the governor likes rail. The governor likes Northwest. I mean, he likes the Northwest Rail. He likes Front Range Rail. The governor set up an accountability committee with the legislature, and that accountability committee is working very strong right now. Elise Jones, who Eric, you've met because she appointed you. The Elise Jones chair is the co-chair of that committee. And for those who know, I know Deb knows Elise pretty well. She's really competent. She's just been term limited. I think you're going to see some changes happening in RTD's governance. And I think you're going to see recommended changes in the legislative constraints that are put on RTD, for example, fare box revenue and things like that. So I think you're going to see a lot of changes occurring at RTD over the next year because the governor wants those changes to occur to just be politically straightforward. And Eric, it'll be interesting to hear you. Maybe you can come back and talk to us from time to time about what you're hearing and stuff, because there will be, Deborah Johnson was a big change, who's the outside executive director that came in. But RTD needed to change. It wasn't receptive. It didn't listen to its constituents, and the governor and the legislature have decided to call them on that. And we're going to see a lot of that change this year. So I'll leave it at that. I see Eric's nodding his head, so because he knows he's got a lot of work in the next. You're up for election then in 2 years from now. Is that what it is?
2 years. Yes, that's right.
Okay. So once again, Sarah, great job. It wasn't 50 slides. It was 57 slides. You did a great job. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll go ahead and move on to our third item, which is retail marijuana, because we're at 7:23. If we need to, we can take a break in like 40 minutes, but let's just see how much progress we can make. Thank you, Eric, for being on. Yeah. So let's go to, we have memo, we had slides, we've had a lot of conversation generated on marijuana. Now that we've had the law passed, we've had a lot of citizen comments. So I'm looking forward to the staff's presentation. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Courtney Damon and Christine Franciscani will walk us through. Pat's computer just died, so she is rebooting to get back in. But we will kick off with Courtney first, and then we'll go to Christine. The entire staff, as well as those from GIS that worked on the mapping, are also here and available for questions afterwards. So with that, let's just jump right into it with Courtney.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just to note specifically, well, first, hi, good evening. Thanks for being here, and I'm excited to talk to you about this. Just to be a little bit more specific, I want Council to know that Commander Kent Witchlatz from the PD's office is available to answer questions. Jason Valling and Allison Long from Public Health are here as well. So here we go. Next slide. to talk to you guys about the work we've done in preparing regulations around bringing marijuana businesses into Broomfield, I think it's important to first start by looking backwards and just mentioning briefly that we have the moratorium that expires January 31st. Next slide. Of course, you know, and I think it was in front of council last week or the week before, that we've got Ordinance 2146, which extends that moratorium until April 1st of 2021. And that's for the sales. The ordinance continues the moratorium for manufacturing and cultivation until 2025. It's important to note right now that one of the things that we are looking for guidance or feedback from council on is the timeline of what we're proposing here. And so right now we've got 2146 extends that moratorium till April 1st of 2021. If council wishes to extend that date after our conversation tonight, or between now and January 12th, council can change that April 1st date at second reading. Now, in addition, as we're talking about timeline, what I want council to know is that right now staff is recommending that, and this is based on the moratorium, being extended till April 1st. But what we're recommending that applications begin to be accepted 60 days, between 30 and 60 days following that April 1st effective date, with the goal that the first license for a marijuana location to be issued in September or October. If that timeline, if a lot of things change, so that timeline's based on what we're recommending tonight. If things change, that timeline can be a work in progress. And so we may have to push things out as we go through the process, but as things are now, that's what staff is recommending. Next slide. From conversations that we've had with council and comments that we've heard from the community in Broomfield, we know that two of the major concerns, or two of the buckets of concern that are out there, have to do with preventing the use of marijuana by youth and the concern about possible increase in crime. And so we want the community as well as council to know that those are things we've thought about when putting together this project and this presentation for you. And so I want to start really by talking about those so that everybody's aware kind of what we have in our draft regulations and in our plan that address these two concerns. Next slide. In the memo, Public Health put together a fact sheet, and that fact sheet addressed youth access concerns. And so what I'm doing with this slide here is I just want council and the community to be able to see some of the regulations that we have in those in the draft document that really touch on what Public Health has highlighted as strategies and ways to help make sure we address youth access concerns. So on this slide, you can see some highlighted things, such as, you saw in Public Health's fact sheet that price, I think the way they have it, youth are price sensitive. Well, council forward thought about that perhaps when we talked about a special sales tax on marijuana, because not only does that bring in funding, but it makes it more expensive, right? And so council and then the community, by voting on it, both have started to address that issue with our special sales tax, number one. Let's go down 3, to the third bullet there, location, setbacks from schools and childcare centers. One of the things that Public Health has on their fact sheet is that location matters. And so that's a pretty big part of our presentation tonight. Brandon Rowe did a lot of work on that. Christine, my colleague from the attorney's office, is going to talk to you about it. But that's one of the things that we've thought about. As it pertains to criminal laws, right? We have youth possession and possession and use is prohibited in the Broomfield Municipal Code. Regulations and prohibitions as it pertains to the businesses include not allowing people under the age of 21 on the premises, It includes the requirement that any criminal activity must be reported to the police department and to the city. There are requirements. So those of you, I know, Councilmember Groom, Councilmember Castriata, I've seen both of you on the local licensing authority. I'm not sure who else has served on it. But we talk about this Councilmember, oh, I'm always afraid I'm going to say your name wrong. Okay, sorry. But so, we've talked about at local licensing authority as it pertains to liquor, right? How are you checking the IDs? And we know again and again, they say they checked the ID, but they somehow missed the date, right? Well, one of the things that they're doing with marijuana is they're requiring these identification scanners to verify the age. And then finally, the last thing on here is talking about the local licensing requirement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, a little more about that here in a minute, but it's another strategy to help address the youth access concerns. Next slide. The second thing that we've really heard from council and the community about, we've heard lots of things, but one of the other big kind of topics is this concern about the increase in crime. And we've worked with the police department to address and think about that. Some of the regulations, and you saw them across the board there, the state requires them, lots of the other jurisdictions around us require them, but here are some of the things that address that. There are security requirements. There are the laws that are already set forth on the books here in Broomfield and in the state of Colorado, and then the crime reporting requirements. And those three topics really, I think, address this concern about increasing crime. Next slide. Okay, now, in addition to talking about those two kind of big topics, what staff has done is we've really tried to create an approach to these regulations that does focus on community safety. And there are 4 prongs that we're going to talk to you about here this evening. Detailed local regulations we've already talked about in those last 2 slides. But these next 3 things are also focused on community safety. And we're going to go I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about those, starting with the phased-in approach. So next slide. Okay, the phased-in approaches staff is proposing for council is recommending that we start with 2 locations. I know that council I had talked about perhaps the number of 5, and maybe that's where we go. But what we wanted to present to you is this idea of starting with 2 locations, so that we start small and we can become bigger if appropriate, right, down the line. But I think that will allow us, the idea is that allows us to really hone in these concerns about health and safety and make sure that, we've got that, we've got those issues in such a way that council then feels comfortable expanding beyond that. Next slide. Okay, so license required. This is a strategy to help the city and county of Broomfield address health and safety concerns. So initially, I think it's important to note, just like with liquor licensing, for marijuana, there's a state license required, and the regulations are pretty darn detailed. There's new regulations are going to take effect January 1st, and those are the ones that I'm referring to with the over 400 pages. The regulations that are relevant right now, it's over 300 pages of regulations, but there's a lot. And to give you an example of the detail of some of these state regulations, I just point to the waste disposal there, because I think there's 2 or 3 pages of requirements about how waste will be disposed of, right? So the state has got a lot. This is a very regulated business. But if we implement a local licensing scheme, what that does is it gives us the ability to address our concerns locally, right? Number one, it gives us access to business information. So we know, what businesses are here, who to contact, and we know their details. It gives us ability to address health and safety concerns, through the regulations that we have. In order to have the license, they've got to follow those. And then we can take action locally, just like in liquor, right? We don't have to wait for the state to do their investigation. We don't have to wait for the state to take action. We can do that with our local licensing authority. And so having a local license is a really great strategy and tool to use in order to address the health and safety concerns that are out there around this business. Next slide. One of the things that we want to talk to council about is what this licensing looks like and how to choose the applicants that are going to be licensed. And at this point, I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Christine, so she can talk to you a little bit more about the licensing, the setbacks, and go a little bit more into detail about the timeline that we have proposed.
Good evening. First, on the question of how to choose applicants to be licensed for marijuana sales in Broomfield, staff is recommending using a lottery system to choose applicants and incorporating into that system a detailed application in order to first gain admission to the lottery. Staff thinks that this will go a long way toward helping attract applicants who are ready to operate successfully in Broomfield. And with the lottery system, that does also help minimize the risk that can come from a merit-based application. Another option for choosing applicants, of course, would be to introduce a merit-based application, and that can be done on its own or also combined with a lottery. Next slide, please. Setbacks. So setbacks would be the distance between any marijuana establishment for sales and a number of potentially sensitive other operations. So in the staff's proposal, we have setbacks that include 250 feet from any residential land use, and then 1,000 feet from any K through 12 school, any state licensed daycare, children's hospital, and then also drug and alcohol treatment facilities. Next slide, please. So here you can see the map that staff has put together, and Brandon Rowe and Greg Scott have done a ton of work on this, including some very last minute changes. So I would like to thank them. And we also had some good requests from council on the resolution of it so that folks can see where the potential locations of facilities might be. Next slide, please. So there are some, there's a question about whether council would like to introduce medical marijuana into the mix if they decide to move forward with sales of marijuana in Broomfield. And there are some important differences between medical and recreational marijuana, including a lower age for medical marijuana and higher taxes for recreational marijuana. Currently, the draft regulations focus on recreational marijuana, and there's also on the books in Broomfield's code a separate regulation that permanently prohibits medical marijuana. So if council did decide to allow medical sales, it could direct staff to draft an ordinance repealing the prohibition on medical marijuana. Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide, please. So lastly, before requesting specific direction from council, we'd like to note the important dates in this process so that everyone can see not only where we've been recently, but where we're planning to go, and so that council could also potentially determine whether this timeline makes sense. So last week you had the first reading for the extension of the moratorium on cultivation and manufacturing, which would also involve the then ceasing of the moratorium on sales on April 1st. Coming up on January 25th is a potential additional study session if you, after this evening, feel like we need to continue the conversation. January 12th, as Courtney mentioned, is the second reading for the extension of the moratorium. And then the perhaps even bigger dates is if we go with the timeline we have now on February 23rd, you would hear the first reading of the draft regulations for the actual regulation of retail sales in Broomfield, with a second reading planned for a month later, not a leap year this year. And then the proposal is to have the regulations be in effect at the sunset of the moratorium on April 1st in 2021. Next slide. So the main things that staff is looking for direction from council on tonight is the question of medical and recreational together, or if council does have any interest in bringing medical into the mix. Staff is also looking to hear council's thoughts on the selection of applicants with lotteries and applications. It's also very important to get feedback on the setbacks that we've outlined. And then also we are looking for council's thoughts on when they would hope to see the first licenses actually issued and operations begin. And that ends my presentation.
And Mayor and Council, that concludes the presentation, and staff is ready and eager to continue the Q&A portion.
Yeah, I'm trying. You know, I was trying to print out the direction. So I guess you know, I'll start calling on council with with the intent to answer the direction questions that staff gave us. I'll go with the council members Jezierski.
Thank you, Mayor. To figure out how to unmute here. So thanks for the presentation. Do have a bunch of comments and maybe one or two questions here. I don't think this was a question that was posed, but I think I saw that one of the topics was licensing, and of course for me that's a no-brainer that we'd want to license this as well as the state. So I'm not sure anyone's questioning that, but just wanted to throw that out there. One of the first questions I think we were posed was how to select the applicants, and I am okay with the randomized process. With maybe a couple of caveats. I think the randomized process is good because it does prevent the sort of favoritism or any allegations of favoritism. So I'm okay with that. I do like, and I think this was in there, that we want to make sure that the applicants are qualified, and so have a pretty robust, I think you've done this, a pretty robust application system, and make sure that everyone does apply is fully complied with all of our, is able to demonstrate that they're able to fully comply with all our requirements. So I think you have that in there. If you don't, let me know. The one question I have, and this would be important to me, is the discretion that the licensing authority would have to deny an application, specifically if it doesn't comply with, and I'm looking at something like the odor management plan or the community outreach plan. And I think you have an application history that they have to supply, and written policies and procedures. So, if you have this full application that's submitted, and technically maybe it does comply because something has been submitted, but does the licensing authority, or will the licensing authority have the discretion to review, what's been submitted and determine that it's maybe not sufficient, and based on that, deny an application?
Councilmember Jezierski, that's a great question. So currently, the way that the proposal from staff is that if an application is complete, then it would move forward to have a chance in the lottery. A couple ways to deal with your concern would be to move in the direction of some sort of merit analysis. I think another way to handle it though would be to require maybe a more significant level of detail for, like, for example, in an odor management plan. If we were able to set out the elements of the plan, then the local licensing authority would be able to see that those elements are included, and thus an application is complete. So those would just be two options to address that concern.
With this, maybe I'm envisioning the process where I'm envisioning that you have the application process where everybody has to comply with our our standards, and they have to be able to show that. And then randomly we pick, let's say, start with a couple applicants that are able to move forward. And then I guess I was envisioning at that point, then they do have their application submitted in front of the local licensing authority, which then can review the application, ask questions of the applicant, and ultimately approve or deny the application. Would that be the process, or am I making this up?
I'm very glad that you said that. That is certainly an option, and I do think that that is an option that makes a lot of sense, because we do keep the randomized nature there to keep risk minimal, but then have some control over the actual quality of the proposal.
Yeah, I mean, that's what and I guess that's how I was kind of reading this, but that's what my thought was, is that it is randomized as to who gets to apply, but at least we then have, human eyes that are looking over, reviewing, and ultimately making a decision as to I won't say the quality of the application, but at least whether it complies and, sufficiently with the discretion of those that are on that authority. So I would, if it's not, it sounds like it's not in the process right now, but I would highly encourage that to be the process. And I'm certainly happy to listen to my colleagues on that, but I think that makes a lot of sense and does give us the best of both worlds, maybe. So moving on from that, I'm going to get to the one area that does concern me, and this has concerned me from the beginning, and this is the location of the establishments. I'm, I guess, happy to see the 1,000-foot setbacks, but from the beginning, I've been very concerned about these establishments being on our main thoroughfares. Right now, and it's something that for me, this is something that very, very personal for me, that, while I'm very open to having marijuana establishments in our community and understand the positive benefits, both to the folks that may be using it or economically to our community. For me, at least personally, I'm not quite ready to have it next to King Soopers. And I said this consistently from the beginning. And when I looked at the map today, I did see that there were a lot of opportunity for this, for an establishment to be placed along the 120th corridor and a lot of our plazas there, and also along some of the plazas, I think up on Highway 7 as well. And from the beginning, I was kind of put off when I'd go up to Louisville, and you could see it right in the plazas there. I think there are other communities that sort of, for lack of a better word, hide it a little more and blends more into the landscape. I understand that our liquor stores are out there, but I can't quite. Myself, and I think a lot of other folks as well, is not quite ready to equate a liquor store with the marijuana establishment quite yet. So from that perspective, I from the beginning have advocated, allowing it in our community, but also sort of, I guess at this point, really relegating it to more of our industrial areas. And I know Councilmember Tessier is going to hate me when I say this, because she's already said this before, and it has nothing to do with wars. It has to do where our industrial areas are, and this predates my time on city council. I think everyone else's our time on city council, and unfortunately, a lot of the industrial areas are in Ward 2, and we may have some areas that looks like up in Ward 5 as well at this point. But really, I mean, if all the industrial areas were in Ward 1, that would be fine. For me, but it all has to do with where me personally, at least in the folks that I represent, are comfortable seeing this right now. And if I guess it's sort of an out of sight, out of mind to some extent for those that are maybe not in favor of marijuana. So I would really advocate for this being limited to, if we can, zone it to just industrial areas at this point. I'd have a hard time approving it in any other area, and have a hard time moving forward with any regulations if it was anywhere outside of our industrial zones. So happy to hear conversation on that. Really happy to see that we had older plans that were in there. I like the 5 total and the 2 starting out. I think that's a good plan. So the timeline in general, I was happy with. The April 1st, 60 days after that, and then sort of phasing in a couple and ending up with 5. I think that's good. And I do like the enforcement procedures we have as well, and the ability to revoke a license if they're not compliant with our rules and regulations, or our code is also pretty strong. So those are my comments. I may have some more after listening to everyone else, but thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, legal team, for really diving into this. I could just see all of the effort and all of the work that has gone into this, and just the teamwork that has been put into this. And we know we have a long way to go in a way too. So I just really appreciated all of your work. I do have some typed out notes here, but I really think we just need to make sure that we have the most stringent regulations that also support businesses who want to do business in Broomfield. To go to some of the questions, I'm going to veer off a little bit, but some of the questions are talking about medical marijuana. Yes, I would like medical marijuana. More importantly too, especially during these COVID times, I want to make sure that we have a good system for delivery of medical marijuana. Currently, the state oversees this, and they have to be registered with the state, and they actually oversee this with the state. So I want to make sure that our rules and our regulations adapt and make sure that we can have delivery of medical marijuana. The lottery versus the merit system, I wanted to look into this a little bit more. So I asked Councilmember Joan Peck out of Longmont to talk with me today a little bit about that and how they've experienced that. And kind of her take on it was that they liked it because they wanted to be clear to the businesses as to what they want in Longmont. And I felt like that was pretty fair. I mean, it's what we do with our affordable housing. It's what we've been doing, with a lot of our businesses anyway. We want to tell them what we want. I like being able in closer communication with these businesses. The thing I worry about the lottery is we could have corporate giants come in, and then our communication with corporate is going to be very, very distant. And so, her and I talked a little bit about that, and they said, hey, if we have a problem, we have to be able to go, to these business owners and be able to follow up quickly. If we go with corporate giants, it's very, very difficult to get quick communication back and forth. And then, they haven't worried about litigation when it comes to the lottery. So I really do want to push the merit system because it's just good communication. It tells our businesses, hey, this is what our Broomfield residents want. And it tells our Broomfield residents, we hear you. And so I feel like that's really important. As far as regulations go, I would like to have a clear view, and I put this in my email earlier, just on how we're being more stringent than the state. We normally are anyway, like oil and gas is another example, those sorts of things. But I really would like to just sort of see it. It doesn't have to be totally detailed. I realize it's 400 pages, but something that's important to Broomfield and how we're more stringent, that would be really important to me. And then also in my email, I noted that any criminal activity must be reported. If those reports to the Broomfield PD, they have to be within 12 hours of occurrence. That's another reason to have a merit system, so that they can, report things quickly and on the ground. And also, I think there's a licensing must also report to the local licensing authority within 72 hours. I also liked, I liked a lot about what Longmont did, to be honest. I liked that they required an ID to enter and an ID to purchase as well. I'm also curious about packaging and labeling, and I know the legal team said that they wanted to look into this a little bit further, but packaging and labeling, especially for kids, if something looks attractive as a little kid, are we packaging these things so that it's, more attractive to little kids or not? I don't know what that looks like as far as the state regulations go, or if local entities are a little bit more stringent. Setbacks. I would like to see most of our next study session, hopefully we have another study session on this, just all about setbacks and what that looks like. We got the newer map today, and I feel like just this deserves a bigger conversation for sure. But I also want to make sure that we're having setbacks for a reason. It's not just because we're picking on places that we feel, might be vulnerable. I think we have to know that they're vulnerable. We have to know why we have these setbacks. So I think that would be important to note. The odor, I don't know why this struck me, but for some reason Boulder's odor words were just, their verbiage was odd to me. It's almost like they said, if you have a normal sense of smell, but I like the word perceptible. So whatever that means to you guys, I think you guys chose that word. Some public feedback that I received from, private sources, just either email or on the phone. One lady was really concerned because I won't give her story per se, but she's not against having, medical or retail marijuana in Broomfield, but her concern was with her son, and she said, and I don't totally understand this either, but I do think it warrants, more in-depth look. But she said that the process of dabbing and the mold in the buds that is being shaved off and sold anyway is causing problems. So I don't know if that's a state issue, or if we're all of this also might go into waste. We need to figure out if they're putting the mold into the waste or if they're reselling it. I'm not quite sure what that looks like. And then the timing just kind of depends on our licensing authority and the education that they need. So whatever time they need to get educated on our new regulations, I don't really have an expectation on timing, but that's important to me that our licensing authority is educated on that. And I just had 2 questions. The one I had in my email was about the Broomfield PD to explain their chart, if they would. And then I'll ask my other question after that's answered.
I don't know if, Chief Krieger, you're on. Great.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Hinkle, what we did is we ran you all stats for 3 years dealing with marijuana. So as you can imagine, we have state laws that we enforce, and in the top, you have the count of the state summonses that were issued. Most of those will be for what is considered a juvenile in this particular law, but they would still be an adult. In other words, they're over 18, but they're less than 21. So you would see those in the state charges. And then we go to the municipal charges, and those are going to be mostly people that are under 18, and we gave you both marijuana and alcohol related tickets that were issued. So one is adults between 18 and 20, and then one is juveniles below the age of 18.
Okay, so the marijuana, that third one is between 18 and 21, is that correct then?
No, so if you look to the left of the chart, you see adult and juvenile. The adult is, we just simply have state charges on those, and that would be between 18 and under 21. Then the next count down, you see juvenile, and you see municipal and county again, or municipal and county, and those are child ages below the age of 18.
Okay, so the term municipal then describes the alcohol and marijuana to the right of it. I'm sorry, because I didn't see another municipal word in that third row. So I wanted to know, I didn't know that that was allocated to municipal. I was thinking, what is these federal laws then? So I apologize.
Generally, we will try whenever possible to issue children under the age of 18 municipal tickets into the municipal court, where we have a little bit more control of the outcome of how they're handled in the court.
Okay, all right, thank you, that helps. And then the last question I have is, I don't know what other municipalities do, but I really did enjoy the health implications of marijuana information sheet. That was really informative. And I wonder if we could require businesses to give their customers this information. And also, could we require ways to educate on how to safely store the products? So I don't know if anyone can answer that now, or if that's for further review, but I feel like that's really important to me. If we really want to educate people, we can educate people at the source, would be important to me.
Councilmember Hinkle, I think I could jump in and take that. Yes, Allison Long from our team, who works on youth substance misuse issues, put together this fact sheet, and she works with other surrounding counties, municipalities, along with the state. So let us see if other counties are doing something similar to your request, and we'll bring that back to you. Thanks.
Okay. Great, thank you, that's it.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. And I apologize, I have kind of a lengthy list of feedback here. But I do want to start by just saying how much I appreciate this thoughtful conversation and for all the work that staff put in on this first memo. To start with the licensing process, I think we leave a lot on the table by not doing a merit-based or competitive-based process. I think if, I understand the legal questions, but a lot of other communities in Colorado have done the competitive or merit-based processes with few problems, and I don't see why we can't do it. I think in that merit-based process, you can compare a lot of criteria more comprehensively and probably get a better result for our community. In a lottery-based process, we could require a sustainability plan, but in a merit-based process, you could compare those sustainability plans. In a merit-based process, you could put in, licensing, the points for getting a license if you have, full comprehensive benefits for your employees or higher wages for your employees that are livable, so that, these new businesses aren't contributing to our affordable housing issues. You could put in, maybe I don't know, but maybe you could do something to ensure that some of these licenses go to Colorado-based companies or locally owned small businesses. I think there's a lot more flexibility we have in terms of determining what types of businesses come to Broomfield through a merit-based process over a lottery. So that would be the direction I would prefer. And then we could have a robust discussion, with legal and, maybe with some outside consultants with a lot of specific knowledge in terms of, the legalities of some of these suggested, points in that metric. But I think it just ensures that Broomfield, gets the best businesses we could get. We've held off a long time on this, and I think we need to do it right and ensure that we're attracting the best actors in the industry. In terms of specific feedback on the draft regs, I think the statute on licensing fees that goes through the city manager's office, we should put that in statute with some specific numbers so that we have it's easy for businesses to forecast costs and all these types of things. I don't know why we wouldn't have some specific numbers in the statute. That feels a little odd. And in terms of the number of licenses, we're starting with 2. I would prefer to do 5, but if we choose to do 2, I would like a timeline on when we should consider adding more licenses, something that comes up as an automatic sunset or an automatic, just an automatic date when council has to make that decision in the future. I don't want to just see us approve 2 and then it kick down the road for 5 years. I think we need to set a date to make sure we consider that. But I would prefer 5, but I understand if council wants to start with 2 and staff wants to start with 2. In terms of setbacks, I was reading the email traffic and I was kind of thrown for a loop. Could somebody clarify, do we have a school in the middle of our industrial zone? Is that what I understood from those emails?
Courtney, do you want to take that one, or would you prefer that Brandon take that?
I think Brandon can answer that far better than I can.
Thanks, Brando. Oh, you're on mute. You're muted.
You don't appear to be muted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Brandon Rowe with the Planning Department. Councilmember Lindstedt, there is a private school that is located in the industrial area. It's not a public school, but there's a parochial school that's in that area. Yes.
Is that allowed in our zoning? I mean, there's truck traffic. That's, the industrial area is not a place I would want, a bunch of kids in a school wandering around, regardless of the discussion on marijuana. I think that merits a little bit of a review of our regulations. It just seemed really odd to me when I was reading the emails.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can definitely follow up with you on an answer to that.
Okay. Well, anyways, I think we need to review that situation because in terms of zoning, Councilmember Jezierski's been pretty adamant on industrial zoning, and it makes it a little bit hard when you have large setbacks because there's a school in the middle of your industrial zone. So I don't know what the solution is there. Maybe we need some type of waiver for a lower setback in certain zoning. That's a strange thing. I don't know how many kids are at that school, what's going on there, but it merits a little bit of review, because that map, there's not a whole lot of industrial zone area left that you could open a dispensary in, which in my view would be probably one of the better areas to put them. I think in terms of other feedback on the setbacks, the daycare and hospital setbacks seemed a little bit large to me, just because when you go to a daycare, someone's bringing their kids with them. They're with their parents. It's not quite the same as just kids walking from school, or something like this. It's a little bit more controlled. And, the areas where we have hospitals are actually two of the areas where I think we're least likely to have large families with lots of children. These are areas where you have a lot more young people, a lot more density, a lot more apartments. I think maybe we should reduce those setbacks to, 500 feet on those two items, just because I think we're boxing out a lot of Broomfield where you would have a lot more demand and a lot less children and families. So that would be my specific feedback on the setbacks, would just be those two items where you have some daycares that are, near the highway that I assume parents use on their way to work, and where you have the two hospitals, because the neighborhoods around them are I think more conducive to this industry than the rest of town necessarily. I think one thing that I would like to see is some format for walk up and drive through service. During the pandemic, it's been working pretty safely across the state, and I don't see why we would include a prohibition on those things. I think that's, especially if we have these setbacks, and these setbacks that are proposed are very strong. I hope council saw the email I had asked a question for the comparison, and there's a lot of proposed setbacks here that are stronger than most of our neighboring communities, not in all circumstances, but just broadly across. There's a lot of requirements in here. So I think given that, we should include walk up and pick up service. A little bit about packaging. I know when I was working in the state legislature, the state regulations controlling packaging are very, very tough. You can't have artistically, cartoons on packages. There's all kinds of rules that exist to make sure that it doesn't look like candy for children, that type of thing. So I'd have to have a more thorough review from staff and legal on what other localities have done in that area to really.
Hey, William.
Yeah.
Your time's up. Can I come back to you after we have a chance to swing through everybody?
That sounds good with me. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you guys listening.
Okay. Councilmember Schaaf. Devin. Councilmember Schaaf. I'll go. I don't know if he dropped off. Well, he couldn't have dropped off. He's sitting right here. Let's go to Councilmember Tessier, and then we'll go back to Schaaf. Oh, I'm having trouble hearing people.
Can you hear me, Mayor?
I can hear you now. Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Schaaf.
I didn't do anything. My computer is taking over. Let's see. So I just wanted to start off with the staff recommendation of the 60 days following April 1st for applications to then be received. And I'm trying to figure out what the rationale for that is.
Sure, I can. Yep, I can address that. So I think the thought is actually 30 to 60 days. What the thought is that we will go through the process, right? Draft the regulations. After they're approved on first reading, they could change between first and second. And what we need to do is be able to implement it. The flow of information through the city of Broomfield. And so that time period after the regulations are passed on second reading gives us the time to make sure that the application and the process is honed and ready for the businesses to come in and give their applications. Now, do you want me to stop there or keep going with what happens after that point?
No, that's fine. That gives me enough to kind of to further understand why staff was making that recommendation. And I think that I need to kind of think about that a little bit more and go back and look at that that timeline with that thought process in mind. But I appreciate that answer. I wanted to touch on licensing. So, I think that Broomfield is a unique community, and that that Broomfield really should continue the practice of bringing in businesses that fit the area and our constituency best. We should develop, metrics that applicants would fulfill or exceed, that would include things such as community outreach plan, and as well as a robust plan for community reinvestment in our community. So these are metrics that kind of go above and beyond what we would expect some other license applicant to have. And so I think that by doing the metric or the merit-based system, we craft a transparent and inclusive system. We can build that mutual trust and accountability between the regulators and the businesses, and establish that kind of culture of cooperation and compliance. But I think the biggest thing for me, that the reason I would push for the merit-based system is that it really furthers confidence in our community by ensuring that questions from the community are directed towards the applicants, as opposed to just the regulators and towards the licensing commission, that they're directed towards the applicants, and the applicants can really be transparent with the community on those answers. And so I think that we need to continue that practice of really kind of getting the best businesses, and that the way that we can do that is by insisting that we go through the merit-based system. And I think that I thought of this in relation to our RFP process. Perhaps our RFP process was a lottery system instead of a merit-based system. And we just said, everybody applies, those people that meet this standard, then we'll just pick one. I don't think that we're going to get the best applicant, and we're definitely not going to get the best product. And so I think that, I would apply that same rationale to the marijuana licensing, and that we go with that merit-based system. Councilmember Lindstedt talked about the current climate with COVID and the restrictions there, as well as the opportunities that have come up. So such things as walk up and drive through and pick up, curbside. There are businesses, in Broomfield that have made investments in kind of that long-term practice of allowing customers to do curbside pickup as well as pick up outside the facility. And I don't think that practice is necessarily going to go away. I think that customers have really started to enjoy that practice. And I think that businesses are finding opportunities to do that. And there are marijuana businesses throughout Colorado that have made investments in that because they have seen a positive reaction from their customers. And so I think by allowing us to continue those practices as opposed to prohibiting those would go a long way to ensuring that there's mutual benefit from future customers as well as future businesses. License fees. So I think that, my time on council, I've seen a number of instances where council has basically changed a past license structure for the city and county, and that we've basically gone away from the statutorily stated license fee to more of a license fee that is controlled by the city manager. And I think that, even more recently, we've crafted license fees that have been in that same realm, that they've been dictated by the city manager. And I think that by continuing that practice of the city manager, I think makes things more consistent. And I just want to make sure that that's the direction that we're going. And maybe that's a question for the city manager as well as our attorney.
Councilmember Schaaf, that is the current recommendation of staff for that very reason, so that if there is a need to change the license fee, at least this would be one reason, if there is a need to change a licensing fee, the city can move to do that very quickly.
Great. Yeah, and I think that would be the direction that I would like to go. And I see that I have about 45 seconds left. So setbacks, the 1,000 foot between retail marijuana stores, I was looking for what the rationale and should this be increased? What's the rationale for that setback between the marijuana stores, and should that be increased to a greater one? I saw that Wheat Ridge had an increased setback between stores, and then some other municipalities had a shorter setback between stores. So if you could give me the rationale on that.
Council member, I think I can start us off on that discussion. So there was a wide variety in distances that were proposed or included in regulations for surrounding communities. With that one, as opposed to going to a shorter or a smaller distance, we went with a 1,000 foot. Number one, based on the limitations of the geographic area of Broomfield. In comparison to some of our surrounding communities, our 33 square miles are definitely smaller. So taking into consideration that the geographic constraint and trying to ensure that the health and safety was taken into consideration while also enabling opportunities for the businesses to come in.
Great, that's my time, Mayor.
Okay, so we're at 8:16. This is going to go on for another hour at least. Do we want to go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back at 8:27? So let's go ahead and do that because, like I said, it's a good conversation. It's going to take a while. Let's come back at 8:27. let's go ahead and get started. I have next in the queue, Councilmember Tessier.
Mayor, before we begin, Pat Gilbert would like to reiterate that we would like to get the question answered.
The medical
Pat?
versus, yeah.
Yes, if each council member could let us know where they stand with respect to allowing both medical and recreational marijuana, and we can kind of track where we get the consensus there. Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that they weren't all responding, but they were running out of time. So we'll do a go run. We'll do our make absolutely certain everybody mentions medical versus. I mean, whether we want medical to be included. So, Councilmember Tessier. Councilmember Tessier, I can't hear you. No. Can she call in?
Can you try turning off your device? That's what I do.
We're going to try to do it on our end, Councilmember Tessier. Just a moment. We're going to flip you on and flip you off.
Did you just say you're going to flip her off?
I was going to clarify that, Councilmember Hinkle, after I said it, but I didn't know if anybody caught it. So
I heard the same thing.
This is a sharp group.
Don't miss a beat. Okay. Darn it.
You want me to send her the phone number?
Yeah.
Is your microphone on your computer?
It's weird because it seems like Devin had the same problem for just a tad.
I know, and I thought it was me. I thought I was going deaf.
Yeah, so Sharon, on your mute button, you're on a Dell, I believe. There's an up arrow right there, and when you select microphone or select speaker, it needs to be same as system. Mine switched for some reason to a different system. It did it just out of the blue.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you. That's exactly what it was. Woo! So hopefully that didn't count as my time.
Now we'll start you new, but just this one time.
Thank you. And Heidi, I totally caught that. I was going to be flipped off. Okay, so first of all, love the fact that Broomfield did put a moratorium in place so we could kind of see where businesses has really worked and worked well as to avoid any of the pitfalls that have occurred in other communities. So I do have a quick question about the license and how soon after a license would one be in business?
Well, in theory, the way that we have it set up at this point, the details that are required for the application are pretty extensive. And so, I mean, even up into including with the location where they would be, et cetera. I don't know the answer to your question, but the best I can do is give you that information.
Okay, that's fine. I just was kind of confused on the whole 30, 60 day. And then how soon they'd be in business, but I can find out more information about that. So yes, I am interested in having both medical marijuana and retail marijuana. So just so I don't forget to answer that one right off the bat. Interested, I would say 3 facilities tops. Do like the staggered approach. If we don't go to 5 stores, then 2 or 3, and if we cater to smaller businesses that are locally grown and owned, have a good track record of producing above standard measures, grades, and clean products or organic, as well as shops that sell both retail and medical. ward integrity is super important in this discussion, and believe that to maybe for the next year to 18 months, no ward should have more than one retail store. Council Member Jazerski, I so appreciate you and respect your opinion, and often agree with you. And I'll just respectfully disagree with you on this one and leave it at that. Staff, what are the setbacks for liquor stores?
It's 500 feet. I'm sorry for the hesitation. I want to give deference to the other staff that's on the line, so I don't want to jump in right away. But for liquor stores, it's 500 feet.
Okay, thank you. I seriously don't think we need to go any more than what we have in place for liquor. Yes, marijuana is new, but I think all the research I've done, there's probably more issues with liquor than there are marijuana. I also think that a merit-based approach is super important. Councilmember Schaaf, I totally agree with you on what having part of our merit system, what give back to the community is this particular business owner gonna have for our community. I also think too, with regard to setbacks, if we focus on, no pot leaf signage, no neon signs, but done really tastefully with good architecture, sustainable architecture and buildings, no flags blowing, no digital signage that, reeks of site site toxicity, I guess. I think that the merit system would be in place. And then, if we had 5 to 10 good business plans, then a lottery could be chosen of those, but after the merit system, and looking at maybe having absolute requirements and then recommendations, and then room for creativity too. I don't want to be so boxed in, or that, because if some business owners have really good plans and it's not on our list, I don't want to miss an opportunity for someone who has a good plan. I think there are benefits to having retail marijuana because the product is regulated. It won't be laced with anything. It won't have ingredients that shouldn't be there. It will be safer than getting pot off the streets, and will not have health so if medical doctors are dealing with someone who may have an overdose, they know what they're dealing with, and they're dealing with more consistent and having better successful results. I think we all know that this product is not for kids. I'd like to see marijuana 21, not 18. Maybe Broomfield has some inspectors surrounding quality. I think that's where our state could improve, is really having better quality, more consistent products. And I'm wondering if staff or anybody on the team has looked into, while there might not be in-house processing, does it affect the quality? Because my understanding is that those organizations that have in-house processing may have better quality marijuana. And that's something I would like to look into a little bit more. And also there was some discussion around having, health warnings and whatnot. And this might be a question for our public health team. And because I don't know if the Surgeon General has any messaging on packaging, and I'm thinking about the community that's under 26 with regard to brain development, people with specific conditions that marijuana can often trigger, or have a propensity to trigger, mental health issues. But I also don't want any shame or blame going on with the marijuana stores that we do have, because a lot of people rely on this for medicine, and a lot of children often, need medical marijuana, and I don't want there to be any sort of stigma around it, because it's something that actually helps people. And so putting it into the corners and industrial areas, it's kind of sneaky and shady, and I just don't like it. I think we could do it really tastefully. I've seen some places in Louisville that you wouldn't even know. It looks like a doctor's office, and it's just really great signage. Anybody who's looking for a marijuana place that they believe in, they don't need the neon signs. We're not trying to attract people from outside of Broomfield necessarily. So did I hit all of the things? Those were my comments, and I know I kind of ran through them pretty quickly. So yes, medical marijuana. What else?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything? No.
Battery or merit-based?
Yeah.
What?
You said merit-based. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I did say merit-based. I really, really want the merit-based. And then, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of good business plans. And after the merits are chosen,
You
then
might have a lottery.
go to the lottery. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Councilmember Anderson.
I think Councilmember Law Evans was ahead of me.
But wait, I wanted public health to kind of weigh in on some of those warnings. Is that a possibility?
Councilmember Tessier, as far as we're aware, the only warnings that are really posted are requirements are related to pregnancy and the health effects specific to pregnancy. I think it would be the education part of a broader public education campaign, and similar as we do in tobacco control and with alcohol, just raising awareness of the potential negative effects for youth and just a data-driven approach.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I'm not, Law Evans, I have her later on. Did you end up putting your hand down, Liz, and lose your turn, or?
I had to log off and log back in.
Okay, go ahead. Well, go ahead then.
Okay, well, thank
Councilmember
you.
Law Evans.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. So I have a lot of points. I guess, first of all, we have received some emails, some feedback, and some of it I think is very, very sensible. Jan Billsborough and Kirsty Lockhart, both of them had some very sensible things that we haven't talked about. I don't want to go through all of that because I don't want to lose my time, honestly, but I guess I'd like staff to go through those and consider them in light of this discussion. I'm very focused on the location of these facilities right now. I think that the phrase location matters is an excellent point when it comes to youth and accessibility. And on that basis, somebody, I forget who it was, talked about having delivery for medical marijuana, and I am 100% against that because it will remove that that location-specific aspect that we're trying to build into this. So I'm not interested in having any kind of delivery. With regards to the setbacks, and I'll just toss this point out, with all due respect to those who've said that we should have setbacks that are the same as what everyone else is doing in town, why should the setbacks for this be less than the setbacks for oil and gas installations? So that's just something to toss out there. And with regards to the setbacks, there's such a, does it matter that so many people are homeschooling now, or by virtually everybody, right? Except for the occasional private school. Does that matter to us as COVID goes on? I don't know, but I'd like, I don't know. I guess I'd like to have the residential setback on that basis increased because from the 500 feet, because location matters. And there's so many kids at home being schooled at home now. So with regards to the setbacks, I kind of like Councilmember Jezierski's concept of putting this in industrial areas or having that be kind of a I kind of like this. It's got issues though, because there is, and I know this from fairly personal experience, there is a very large industrial area right along US 36, and that will become a prime target for businesses like this. We've already been approached by people who want to use our bit of frontage there. Something else so question for staff, quick question. The location is an integral part of the application for the business, but yet explain to me how you envision the timeline working, because if a business doesn't know if they've been chosen for a license, they have to go out and put a lease option or something like that on a property, or a purchase option or something like that. And then I assume if there's 15 applicants and we only allow 2 or 3 stores, which is my preference, then there's a whole bunch of options that don't get taken. So I want the approval, the time between application and choosing to be short so that we don't tie up too many properties. Does anyone from staff want to comment on that thought?
Sure, Councilmember Law Evans, thanks for that question. There are a number of ways of doing it, and in part, we would probably leave that up to the businesses, but generally what we would be seeking is some sort of proof from the applicant that if they obtain a license, they will be allowed to operate where they've proposed.
Sure.
And that's
Sure. A lease option or something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. So if we could keep that timeline, well, okay, that's fine. When it comes to the licensing, well, wait, let me say one more thing about the setbacks. I think one of the emails we got today talked about why don't we have setbacks from parks, rec centers, malls, things like that. And it does seem to me to be somewhat inconsistent to have setbacks from schools, but not setbacks from other places where children might congregate or be allowed to go on their own, such as parks and things like that. So I'd like to consider having those sorts of things built into setbacks as well. With regards to the licensing, do applicants have to apply? Is there a sunset on the license? Do applicants have to reapply after 3 years, something like that? And along with that, what happens if there's a license violation?
Councilmember Law Evans, the regulations currently have applicants reapplying every year, and that is something that we see commonly throughout the communities in Colorado. If there is a violation, there are 2 different places in the code currently in the draft regulations that address different types of violations. But one of the things that could happen and is likely to happen is that that issue would go for review to the local licensing authority.
And the local licensing authority has or will have under this the power to turn down or to approve or turn down a license. Okay, if there's an egregious violation, does the local licensing authority have the opportunity, have the power to yank that license permanently or for the remainder of the year or what have you?
Yes, they do. They have the authority to revoke.
Okay. All right. So let me get then to my specific feedback on medical and recreational. I don't really care as to medical and recreational. I guess I don't care. Makes no difference to me. How to choose the applicants? I think having a merit-based system is of the most interest. I do worry a little bit, as Councilmember Jezierski noted, about favoritism. And based on that, I think that developing the metrics for the merit-based system are going to be crucial. And I don't know if that's another, it probably is another study session, but perhaps we should have council members think about what the metrics we want included in the application would be. So, because on what merits are we going to choose, on what metrics? With regards to the setbacks, as I said, I see a lot of inconsistencies in the setbacks. I would like to standardize a setback between, I'd like to standardize on a larger setback, school zones and residential. Kids are at home these days going to school. And I'd like to also have setbacks in potentially from parks, rec centers, malls, anywhere where youth congregate, because as was noted, I think Ms. Christine, that you were the one who noted that location matters. Was that you? No, maybe? Somebody in the presentation. Okay.
That wasn't.
So Liz, I need you to wrap up.
Okay, I'm on the last one. The approval of the regulations, when we issue them, when we begin. I think the timeline we're on is fine. And I'm good with that. And I think I hit all the points. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if I can get this all in the 5 minutes, but I'll try. And covering those 4 questions first, the selection process. I do agree with the merit point-based system. And if we can't go that route for legal considerations, our regulations should be the best anyways. And so we should be only attracting those same retail establishments, but I really do prefer the merit-based. I have several changes to the regulations or proposals that I'd like to make, but I'll get to those next. Timing on the first license issued. This is, for me, this is no hurry. I want to make sure you take the necessary time and do it right. So whatever that time frame looks like. And on recreational versus medical marijuana sale, I do have a couple of questions before I can answer this one. Like with the co-location of the retail and medical stores, I know that the minimum age is then 21 years. So it takes away that 18-year-old ability to purchase. But are there what are the pros versus the cons in co-locating them? For example, when you're selling medical products, is that limited to specific products, or is the same recreational products available for medical use? Is there a distinction in the products? And I think we covered this once before. Do you think that, do we foresee having individuals trying to seek medical reasons to avoid paying the higher taxes? If somebody can answer those questions.
That's a good question.
Regarding the products and the difference, I don't know the answer for sure, but I suspect that there's not necessarily any difference in the products, but the state does regulate the two differently. So if the state regulates the products differently, then that could be the case. Can you remind me of your first question, please?
Oh, and just generic pros and cons. Is there anything that?
Yes. So, and I have no dog in this fight, but some folks would say one of the pros of co-location is that then medical marijuana is available to those who need it, and those who qualify for it. Some communities do tend to think that the fact that medical marijuana draws a lower taxation amount is a con. So those are just a couple of thoughts on that. And regarding the question of seeking a medical endorsement to avoid taxes, that I just don't know. I think that the state pretty comprehensively regulates the program for obtaining those permissions. And I think that is something that they've thought about, but I would have to get more information for you on that.
Okay, thank you. And so based on that, I would say, I mean, part of the reason that I think some were in favor of bringing to marijuana, the retail sale here, was for medical reasons. So I really do think we would want to allow the medical sale as well. And with that co-location and still 21 years and up, it seems the better option. And so I think that was all of the questions. Okay, so here are some of my comments and questions that I have based upon the regulations. I'm thinking about the baseline development, and we're talking about, brand new Class A commercial development coming in. Some of those locations were in that community, but just because it's allowed, the developer wouldn't have to allow marijuana there, correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So they do have that choice, because it just doesn't seem necessarily what they're planning for baseline. So I appreciate that. When I was looking at the setbacks and some of the information here and the data that was provided, it's just this category of 18 to 25-year-olds seems to be where the focus really ought to be when it comes to protecting health and safety. With the human brain continuing to develop, I think we had said it was set into the mid-20s. And from the CCOB fact sheet, information coming from the state, or where I'm not sure what the source was, but deficits in attention and memory have been detected in marijuana using teens, even after a month of abstinence. And there's some more information along those lines. And that most high schoolers who use marijuana bought it from or were given it by someone who was able to purchase that. So I think this the critical setbacks really are from these young adult more than we're looking at preschools. And it really seems like the focus for setbacks ought to be these youth serving facilities, maybe junior colleges, community colleges, vocational schools, places where these kids hang out. Some examples in one of the emails was like, I think it was movie theaters and bowling alleys, recreational facilities, parks where youth hang out, especially to play sports. And those are really the areas where the setbacks when it comes to schools really, it seems it should be more focused on that slightly older population, maybe 14 and up, or there it was like, focusing on 18 to 25. So just something to consider. And I don't know, I guess that's a question. Can we include, and would we even have a reason to include any of these other facilities? I think maybe that's a discussion for another time. Now, just a quick note. It looks like on 160th, North Metro Station 66 is an allowed location. So that's a question that's for Brandon. Take a closer look there. And I have 1 minute, so I'm not gonna get through all this, but someone had mentioned looping, which is the purchase of legal limits on the same day at multiple locations where one individual could gather more than the legal limit, and that would potentially lead to that distribution to underage. So have we had any consideration for looping? Any research into that?
Member Anderson, that's not something that we've looked at, but we will, and we'll be prepared to address that.
Okay, that is great. And then there's also a question about the, somebody raised about method of tracking purchases by the same individual at multiple stores, and that would fall into that looping category. And then cut me off when you need to, Mayor. So products and concentrations on the application. There's a section where 541-120A requires description of the products and services to be provided. And if they file the application and then decide to sell something different, what does that process look like? Would they just not be allowed to sell anything other than what they list on the application?
Right. Well, they would be required to comply with what they were given a license to complete, right? And so that's part of the things that we can revoke a license for, suspend a license for, bring them back into the authority, or with licenses they could, I presume there would be a process to file some kind of a request to modify.
Okay, that's appreciated. And then I'll stop at this one, the youth appealing products. I think that this has been brought up already, but I would really appreciate if we put some restrictions on the products that we are allowed to sell, the limits on the THC potency. I've heard that 15% is pretty standard limit, and edibles that resemble candy, flavored vaping liquids, anything that appeals to the younger adult population, or could be mistaken by a child at home and consumed. So I'll stop there, but that's my comment so far. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councilmember Lim.
Yeah, I have quite a few comments on the regulations. I don't know if I'll get to all of them in this round. I'll start with the questions though. Yes, medical and recreational sales. Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of a merit-based system. In the section 5-41-130, the grounds for denial of an initial application, I think, are listed as if a facility has previously in another location had their license revoked, I think is the way it's worded. It wasn't clear anywhere in the regulations to me that we were going to ask if the facility had violations in general in other locations that didn't result in a license being revoked. So I would at least want to make sure that we were asking just generally about violations. Did I miss something there?
Councilmember Lim, I'm not sure if you did or not, but that is something that we can certainly look at adding into the regulations. I'm not sure that it's in there.
Okay, let's see. I could use a flow chart here. If you know, I'm not clear. I know other council members have asked a few process kind of questions of the timing of how all this would go. And at what point does the state application precede other Broomfield steps?
Yeah, so oh, go ahead, Christine.
No, go ahead, Courtney.
Okay, so I think the way that we see it happening right now is similar to the liquor licensing, where an applicant is basically applying for the state application at the same time as they're applying for the Broomfield application. And the way the clerk's office does it right now is they receive notification that the state application is complete, and it's my understanding, basically give the license, right? The state license and the local license at the same time. So it's happening in parallel. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I could still use a flow chart. If this comes back to us, I would like to see that parallel at the same time and the next steps in the Broomfield process and everything, if somebody is willing to do that. Okay, setbacks. Council member Jezierski referred to the industrial area of a different ward. The industrial area that's in red here is in Ward 3 to a large extent. So this is in a different ward than he pinpointed. So it is of our concern. There's a discrepancy from what I see between the intro on page 7 and what's in the regulations. So the intro on page 7 says they're going to require a 1,000-foot separation between retail marijuana stores. And the regulation says licensed premises shall be no less than 1,000 feet from any other licensed premises. So licensed premises, in my mind, meant liquor stores too. Is that correct? Is that what you meant by that regulation?
Councilmember Lim, I've got the regulations up, and licensed premises in definition 6 are specifically premises that apply under this chapter. So it's that, and that's a very good question. This is meant to include only marijuana licensed premises.
Okay. Let's see. Do daycares include preschools? Where do preschools fall in the setbacks? There's a K through something setback and there's a daycare setback. Where are preschools?
Councilmember Lim, so preschools that are part of a daycare facility will be clustered in with the daycares. And then preschools that are part of a K through 12 school or offered at like an elementary school are included in that elementary school location that we used. We can definitely clarify the language moving forward that includes preschool operations.
Okay, I don't know. I thought we had independent preschools in Broomfield, but maybe, you know, that are standalone that wouldn't be covered then. Okay. And then I saw the reply to Councilmember Lindsted's question that was addressing what I was going to ask about, but I still want to ask it. What about reciprocal setbacks? I mean, the answer was no, we're not going to consider that. I certainly don't want to I want 1,000 feet from a school in the siting of the marijuana shop, as much as I later want, you can't put a school within 1,000 feet of an existing marijuana shop. I mean, this, you know, so that I want us to think about at least that answer that was in response to Councilmember Lindstedt. I mean, you know, the other issue would be, can a builder put a home within 250 feet of the marijuana shop? That's another reciprocal setback question. I'm not sure anybody's going to be able to afford to put a marijuana shop up in Baseline, but are they going to, in this red area in Baseline, going to put apartments over marijuana shops? I mean, that would be
Multi-use.
allowed then, according to these regulations, if we don't have any reciprocal setbacks. So I have other regulation questions, but I think my time is up.
Okay, we'll go to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to our attorney's office and staff for preparing this comprehensive first draft. We'll get to the questions first. I do support allowing the co-location of medical and retail marijuana sales. I also support delivery of medical marijuana and walk-up and curbside pickup. I am also leaning toward a merit-based application process so that the best operators that most strongly reflect our community's values are selected. Broomfield should select the highest quality applicants that meet sustainability and employment standards, and there's simply no way to select applicants that are the right fit for Broomfield based on a randomized process. I lost my place. Longmont's merit-based licensing process did not result in litigation. The application should include a social equity component such as living wages, benefits, and health care. The criteria should be clear and transparent for scoring. In terms of the regulations, most of the regulations and licensing requirements are in line with neighboring jurisdictions, and I feel comfortable with that with a few exceptions. I'm okay with starting with the 2 licenses as we intentionally navigate this new industry in Broomfield, but I would like to incorporate a staggered rollout of licenses for future issuance. For example, allowing 2 licenses initially, then allowing for additional licenses to be issued after a period of time, a year or 2. I think locating them in the transit corridors in the north and south makes sense from a revenue generating perspective. I also don't understand the need for setbacks at daycares and hospitals. Longmont and Louisville don't have those. And I agree with Councilmember Henkel that setbacks should be justifiable. And I don't believe these are unless I'm missing something. The real or perceived dangers of some locations really needs to be justified. Kids are going back to school very soon, and by the time these regulations go into effect, they won't be homeschooled. How soon after the approval? Well, as soon as time permits, you know, logistically. I know it's a lot of work, but summer, fall is, you know, I have no idea how long it's going to take to get all this together. We could open up a 45 to 60 day window for applications similar to Longmont. And that's all I got. Did I get them all?
Thank you. Councilmember Groom.
Thank you. Am I the last one to give comments? It
Well,
seems
I mean,
like.
I'm gonna cycle back.
Oh, okay. It seems like
and
we've
then
been a
what-
while.
What I am going to do after you speak is I want to talk to have Jennifer and talk about what the next steps are and what we anticipate, and then go for second comments. So, Councilmember Groom, go ahead.
No worries. I'll go through quickly. I have to say I agree with a lot of the previous council comments. I do disagree with medical marijuana. I think limiting to 2 locations that is non-medical marijuana to start with, and then looking at medical marijuana later. And then merit-based are very similar to what we do right now for the competitive bid process. It's a weighted system and analysis. That's what I would be. The setbacks, I know that, let's see, on page 3, no, wait, which page is that? Oh, here. I'm on the wrong. Sorry, bear with me. Well, I have page 3. Does anybody know what page the setbacks are on? Because I've lost my place here. There we go. Here's page 3, but it wasn't filed. On the third bullet, I'm in support to require a 500-foot setback from any residential purpose. And then on the third to last budget or bullet, I'm not quite sure why we call out Children's Hospital. I think it should be 1,000-foot setback from hospitals. And that's my opinions on that. And then I wanted to ask a few questions about paralleling the LLA process, the Liquor License Authority. You know, when we go through a new license approval, there's a background check on the applicants. There's a 100-foot radius or it's more than that, 1,000-foot radius that they have to go out and get public approval or input, I should say. Is that process, that application process in that level of detail going to be part of the licensing process?
Yes, Councilmember Groom, good questions. Currently, a background check is part of the licensing process, and the regulations right now state that the local licensing authority is the entity to determine the affected area or neighborhood, so that they can hear what, you know, they could take, I think, evidence on how to determine the notice area and that kind of thing.
So we're still going to require a notice area, just like we do a liquor license?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then
Councilmember Groom, I'm sorry, Pat Gilbert would like to add to that just real quickly.
Thank you.
Councilmember Groom, with respect to that area, the typically 1 mile radius that they use in the Liquor Licensing Authority, that is based on the criteria in the liquor statute that an applicant has to show the needs and desires of the neighborhood. That is, I don't believe that's a requirement in the current regulations as drafted, so it would not be similar in that respect.
Okay. I would have to think about that now, because in a way I think it's a good thing. One, because it does give notice to the surrounding neighbors before it comes in instead of after. But I will put that on the back burner and think about that 1 mile radius requirement like we have in the Liquor License Authority. I would like, in parallel to this plan, to consider a human health and service rollout plan. So I know I hear us saying, yes, we want that, but I think it should be complete and rolled out on the very first day that the first license is issued. Because I really don't want that held up and pushed off and give it a year and we don't have time for it. I definitely think both of those should be rolled out at the same time. Approval of marijuana licensing as well as our health and service plan to support marijuana in our community. And then I did have a question for Mr. Krieger, Chief Krieger, if he is still on, or the commander, whichever one.
The chief is on.
Okay, Chief, one time you and I talked about teens and marijuana use, and one of the things that's happening is teens and frankly adults, legal adults, choose marijuana because there's really no way to detect it or test for it on a roadside, or if you're busting a bunch of teens for drinking, it's usually the teens smoking marijuana that does not get the MIP, but the teens drinking do. So, and people are quite wise to this. What is our police enforcement ability to detect it? And do we need special equipment or training to detect marijuana and test on a roadside?
Yes, Councilmember Groom, thanks for the question. A lot has changed over the last few years as the regulations have evolved, the technology has evolved. So to detect marijuana, it's the same DUI law, although it is in state law now 5 nanograms for 100 milliliters of blood. The one limitation is you cannot do like a breathalyzer test, or what we would do is a portable breath test out in the field. That technology, there's some testing going on, but to my knowledge, it's not yet produced and validated to do a field test for marijuana in somebody's breath, and obviously we can't do it in the field for blood. So that's where the limitation is. Generally, the tickets that you see, we write them for people that are actually in possession of the marijuana.
Yeah. So I guess that's my concern is how will we enforce someone if they're impaired or even teens when we don't have the technology for it? Is there any equipment that you know of that's up and coming?
So so if somebody's operating a motor vehicle, they have indicia of intoxication, whether it's marijuana or it's alcohol. And really, from a DUI standpoint, the arrest is made on probable cause of using the indicia of intoxication. The same thing if we ran into a teen, even if they're intoxicated, regardless of whether they're intoxicated, if they're driving, it would be a DUI investigation. If they're simply intoxicated and out on the road, we're going to take care of them, make sure their parents come get them, and those kinds of things. From a DUI standpoint, as you might recall, even with alcohol, you can test either blood or breath. If the question is marijuana, then under the express consent law, it is blood.
Okay, thanks. And I've got to go through the rest of mine pretty quickly. In regards to unlawful acts and the penalties, I would like to see that parallel what we do for the alcohol license authority, where they have so many days in abatement, they're put on penalties. If that's not met, they have to shut down. So they would lose sales on a Friday and Saturday night instead of having one flat fee, because if you look at 2,000 or 5,000, that's probably nothing compared to what they would lose if they had to shut down for 4 or 5 days over a weekend, like we do with our liquor license. So I would like to see that one beefed up in parallel the liquor license. And then odor control, I see that being just a complete railroad right into a brick wall, just like we did with the oil and gas issue. And we need to, there's one bullet associated with odor control. And I think it's, what is odor control? Because somebody could stand right next to the front door and say it stinks. Somebody could be out in the parking lot and say it stinks. You could say it stinks, but I can say it doesn't. Like, does anybody have any regulations for odor control? Because we really did miss that one in the oil and gas. So let's see if we can learn from that what odor control means and beef it up. And then I like the ID to enter and an ID check to purchase. I am very against delivery of any kind, whether it's medical or recreational or curbside. Here's the thing, right now with food delivery, it has been proven, and it has happened to me, where the point of whomever it was in the process ate part of the food before it gets to you. So I don't think we should have any kind of marijuana being delivered and not controlled.
Kim, yeah.
I know. And that's all I had. I just had a couple other things, and I will definitely send them to staff.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and I'm going to say the names of the people that I didn't ask earlier about medical, and just give me your quick answer on that. Councilmember Jezierski, yes or no on medical? I think he just said yes. Councilmember
Yeah,
Hinkle?
I'm okay with that. Sorry, yeah, I couldn't find my mute button. I'm okay with medical.
Okay, Councilmember Hinkle?
Yes, and delivery, thanks.
Okay, and delivery. Councilmember Lindstedt?
Yes, fully support.
Councilmember Schaaf?
Yes, on the medical and preference to co-locate.
Okay, so.
Mayor, if I may just quickly, before we move to round two, Pat Gilbert has a correction that she would like to note back to Councilmember Groom's question. Pat?
Councilmember Groom, I need to clarify my answer to you. While there isn't that criteria with respect to needs and desires of the neighborhood, there is a neighborhood boundary that is set in the context of entering.
A neighborhood boundary that's what? Sorry?
That is set with respect to the application before the LLA.
Yeah.
Oh.
As part of that process.
All right, perfect. Thank you for the clarity.
Okay. So, City Manager Hoffman, let's just kind of talk about what, I mean, and I'll go ahead and allow for additional comments because it is 9:18. I mean, we could, but we're going to have another study session on January 5th on this subject, correct?
Yeah. Pat's going to walk us through what the subsequent dates are that are coming up.
Well, that wasn't my question. I asked a specific question. We're going to have a study session on January 5th.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the point I'm trying to get to is that this is our last meeting of the year. So the first meeting of next year, our next meeting, will be a study session to drill down on this even more.
Correct.
And once again, I'll go back to other questions. I mean, I think you got your direction on marijuana. I think you got your direction. I think you got your direction on people want it to be merit-based as much as it possibly can. And I guess the dream would be to have 5 people you do a lottery that all meet every one of our criteria. So what you're getting is a lot of feedback on, and I'll go ahead and see if anybody wants to bring up more stuff right now. But I don't think the setbacks or the citing council has given complete direction tonight. And so I'm assuming on January 5th that you'll try to hone down on the setbacks and the settings. I mean, specifically, like there were 2 or 3 comments, about whether it should be on transit corridors and the like. And so that's going to be one of our main subjects on January 5th.
It is.
And then on the regulate, go ahead.
I also do want to add that we will need to do some more research and follow up with respect to the comments we've heard tonight about delivery.
Yes. So, and then on the regulations, there are a lot of comments in a whole bunch of places, and we can certainly, allow a couple of minutes for everybody. But once again, it may be the best use of time to have everybody send an email with their comments on the regulations.
That'd be great.
Rather than spending tonight trying to cover that, because there are so many comments on regulations. Once again, I thought this was a great conversation, and there were so many comments on the regulations that what I would suggest is that everybody send their comments to you on the regulations, and that the staff, Courtney and Christine and Pat, would kind of zero through that and maybe even have an email conversation with council members or conversations with council members talking about various issues, because that might be more productive than trying to go through a whole bunch of comments tonight. And I see a lot of people nodding their heads. I mean, the point being,
we would certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, the point being is that we had a really good conversation. I generated a whole bunch of comments, certain consensus on certain areas. On other areas, there is a lot of discussion on regulations and sightings, and I thought Gene's comment on reciprocal setbacks is certainly worth discussing. And so with that, I'm gonna, is there other? I mean, before I ask, let council members make some follow-up comments or want to summarize differently than I did. Pat or Jen or Courtney or Christine, is there any other thing you want to specifically ask for right now?
No, I think this is plenty. This exceeded our expectations with regards to kind of how concise this conversation was and how much time you all have spent So if you give us an opportunity to digest the information, we'll consolidate it, we'll do the follow-up. Anything that you can send in writing, it really does help us. It expedites things tremendously. And then we can send kind of a summary once we get those questions in, again, to expedite the time that then comes on the 5th.
Yeah, because I just want to maximize that 5th and try to keep to try to keep to the timeline that was laid out. And there were two other things that I think are worth noting. One was I got everybody seems to be willing to go with the 2 right now. I heard Sharon mentioned something on 3rd, but let's go on with the 2 right now. But there seemed to be some desire to set a date down, a year from now. I don't know what that mechanism would be. Let's just say a year from now, we would take an inventory of where we're at with the 2 licenses and potentially issue additional licenses. But the setbacks are going to be what's fascinating, because it's not like there's a lot of places. And so I heard that comment. I didn't want to lose that comment. I can't remember the other one. So are there any other comments that the council wants to make? Because I really do think if you guys could put your comments on regulations in writing, that would be far more productive. Go ahead, Councilmember Jezierski.
Thank you. I just want a clarification on the merit-based system. I know there's a lot of push for that. I went first, and I certainly have no problem with that. I was concerned with the randomization process of not having anyone actually looking at the application. And that's why I sort of was pushing for at least a hybrid system. But I guess I'm just not clear as to what the merit-based system would look like. So I'd like some clarification on that, because looking at the application or at the statutes that we have so far, it's pretty vague. So there's a lot of talk about it, but I haven't really heard any details of what that looks like. So I mean, is it a point system? What was put up there? Is there something different? And then really what I want to know is who's making that decision? Is it like every application that comes in is going to go to the LLA and then they're going to pick the 2 best? I mean, so I'm just trying to, I know we had a lot of talk about everyone's in favor of merit-based, but what does that really mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment. And I do think that, that there needs to be, so when you guys need to come back with us on the 5th and I don't know what else we have planned on the 5th, but probably shouldn't plan a lot more than that. But okay. So the answer is, Stan, those are great questions, and those need to be fleshed out on the 5th, or we have to have another study session.
Okay.
So, and then, the other comment I was going to make was that I heard from most people that the timing's flexible. We need to get it right. So let's go ahead. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I will say some of these questions and email them directly, but I have a couple that I'd like a little clarification on. The delivery service and curbside pickup, was that even up for debate? Is that even a consideration? Are we just like
check it
that out there? What was it?
Pat.
Oh.
I think they said they needed to check it out, whether that's even legal. Yes.
Okay.
They need to determine if it's even remotely legal.
Okay, and then if it is, we will weigh in on it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then I just want to also note, Councilmember Jezierski had talked about 120th, and that is a gateway into Broomfield, and I really do agree with him. But looking closer at that area, it looks like there's residential communities just south of Broomfield. I'm forgetting the name of that neighborhood down there, but are we doing a setback on our borders to our neighboring communities? Has that been a consideration? Because it looks like maybe we're not. Are we considering the residential right on our borders?
We should.
We had not, but we can take that into consideration for the next study session for you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the rest of these I will save and email them in. Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I will send most of this over email, but I did have one request for clarification and one closing comment. When it comes to deciding the merit-based versus the, merit-esque-based system with a lottery at the end, I would appreciate a comprehensive, legal review of what standards could be included in a strictly merit-based proposal, as opposed to what could be included in a lottery-based proposal. It's my understanding that those could have different sets of standards. And just to close out, I think everybody on this council seems to think that, we should get the best businesses we can here in Broomfield. And you know, I think that goes a little bit in contrast to you can't relegate those businesses to the shadows if you want the best businesses. So I think we need to be really thoughtful in the zoning. Well, we can't have the best of both worlds here all the time. So, you know, just something to chew on. I appreciate the time, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Hinkle.
Great comments, you guys. And Lori and Jean, I can tell all these oil and gas questions are seeping into our like setbacks and things like that, right? Like setbacks from other counties and reverse setbacks. So it's amazing how one crosses over into the other. Stan, I will forward you as well. There was a lot of input from Christine's email to us with the Longmont's merit-based systems. I don't fully understand it yet, but I'll make sure everyone has that verbiage and all the details that Longmont went through. I would like to see exactly how they've done it. If it's like a point system, for me, I'm a math person. So I would want, you know, sort of a point system. So it's not just sort of willy nilly. They did have on there that the owners, you know, there's something about their moral character. I don't know how you change that to like a rubric and, you know, on a scale of 0 to 10. I don't know how you do that. So I would like to look into Longmont and how they actually do their merit-based system. And then it sounds like also, you know, we need to dive into setbacks. I'll get feedback via email, but it would help to know if there is any, like Councilmember Lindstedt said, like any legal implications, but it sounds like Longmont has been doing a really good job with their merit-based system. So I would really desire for staff to really look into that. Thank you.
Okay, so Jennifer, I'm looking at the proposed agendas, you know, and you have your urban renewal in there. You keep trying to put that in sooner than later. I think you need to bump that back a little. So, because you have 90 minutes for that. So, but we need to apply plenty of time. But anyway, so I guess we, you know, speaking of Guyleen, I guess we probably should have our coordination meeting tomorrow. So that
sounds good, Mayor.
Okay, so once again, we'll go ahead and close out the study session, but I guess I always felt that this was the most important part, these regulations. So great conversation, council, and great feedback to staff, and as they say, to be continued. Hey, and everybody have a nice Christmas. So one other, we are going to have a town hall on Thursday night, a COVID town hall on Thursday night, and I think I saw that Councilmember Lim's going to be with us, and so good. So anyway, so for those of you that don't listen to those, you know, they get packed. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, y'all.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Good catching up.
See you next year.
See y'all later. Bye.
Bye-bye.